If you like the content I create, please support me with your subscription and a comment. The disappearance of the Roanoke colony. One of the greatest mysteries in American history occurred at the end of the 10th century. In 1587, a group of more than 100 English colonists settled on Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina, hoping to start a new life in the New World. It was an ambitious project supported by the English crown and led by Yonge, who later returned to England in search of supplies. His journey, which was supposed to last only a few months, was unexpectedly extended by 2 years due to the war between England and Spain. When he finally managed to return to Roanoke in 1590, he found the place completely deserted. There were no signs of fighting, no bodies, no belongings. The houses had been carefully dismantled, as if the colony had been abandoned in an orderly fashion. But the most disturbing thing was that there was no trace of the people. All he found was a word carved into the trunk of a tree, Croton. There were no distress messages or emergency symbols, just that word, without context or explanation. Croton was the name of a nearby indigenous tribe, and also of an island located a short distance away. Young W. tried to go there to look for them, but a storm prevented the expedition and the fate of the colonists was never known. Since then, numerous theories have emerged. Some believe that the colonists peacefully integrated with the natives of Croton Island. Others suggest that they were victims of an attack, or that they tried to flee and died in the attempt. There are also those who hold darker or even supernatural beliefs. For centuries, archaeologists and historians have searched for clues, remains, any evidence that might explain what happened to the lost colony. But to this day, no definitive proof has been found. Every attempt to solve the mystery ends up raising more questions. Did they mix with the indigenous peoples and erase all traces of their origins? Were they swept away by some catastrophe? Or did they simply decide to disappear, leaving behind only a word to baffle those who sought them? The disappearance of Roanoke remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of history. An entire community vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a whisper carved in wood. Croton, a word that, more than 400 years later, continues to generate theories, research, and fascination. The secrets of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Great Pyramid of Giza is one of the most impressive monuments ever. Built by mankind, it has stood for more than 4,500 years in the Egyptian desert, and despite all the studies, modern technology, and archaeological theories, it still holds secrets that no one has been able to completely unravel. It was built during the reign of Pharaoh Cheops and is believed to have served as a tomb, but its design, precision, and mystery have led many to doubt that this was its only purpose. One of the first unknowns is how it was built. The pyramid is made up of more than 2 million stone blocks. Some of them weigh several tons. There are no cranes, engines, or modern tools. However, the stones are placed with such precision that not even a sheet of paper can fit between some of their joints. How did they manage to move and place such blocks with such accuracy? There are many theories. Ramps, pulleys, thousands of organized workers, but no explanation is entirely satisfactory. There are no plans or writings from the time that clearly describe the construction process. Another mystery is the interior of the pyramid. Its interior has been explored for centuries, but not everything inside is known yet. There are chambers, passageways, and ducts whose purpose is unclear. Some researchers believe that the chambers had a spiritual purpose. Others believe they were mechanisms to protect the pharaoh's tomb or even ventilation systems. In recent years, infrared scans have detected hidden voids inside the pyramid, spaces that have not yet been explored and could change what we know about its structure and purpose. There is also the mystery of its alignment. The Great Pyramid is almost perfectly aligned with the cardinal points, with a precision that amazes even modern engineers. How could they align such an enormous structure with such accuracy without the aid of advanced instruments? Some believe that the ancient Egyptians had very precise astronomical knowledge, but others think there may be something more behind it all. In addition, there are curious details. For example, no mummies have been found inside the pyramid. even though it is believed to have been a tomb. And although other pyramids have been discovered in Egypt, none have the perfection, scale, or internal complexity of the Great Pyramid. Was it just a tomb, or did it have some deeper purpose related to knowledge, the cosmos, or something we do not yet understand? After thousands of years, the Great Pyramid continues to challenge our ideas about the past. It is a puzzle made of stone, immense and silent, keeping its answers deep within its structure. Every time we think we understand a little better, a new mystery appears that shrouds it once again in mystery. The Voynich Manuscript. One of the world's most mysterious books is found in a library at Yale University. It has no title on the cover, no author's name, and its contents have baffled cryptographers, linguists, historians, and scientists for over 100 years. It is known, the Voynich Manuscript, in honor of Wilfried Voynich, an antique book collector who discovered it in 1912. Since then, no one has been able to decipher its contents, making it one of the greatest enigmas of human knowledge. The manuscript consists of about 240 pages, although several more are believed to be missing. It is written in an alphabet that does not resemble any known language. The words are organized in such a way that they seem to make grammatical sense, with repetitions, patterns, and structures. But no one has been able to understand their meaning. The strangest thing is that it does not seem like a randomly invented gibberish. Many experts have analyzed its structure with modern linguistic tools, and everything indicates that it could be a real language, although completely unknown to us. In addition to the text, the book is full of illustrations, drawings of plants that do not exist in the real world, astronomical diagrams that do not correspond to the known heavens, human figures, mostly female, submerged in strange green liquids or connected by tubes, as if they were part of some ritual or medical system. Everything seems to have a purpose, but no one has been able to understand what it is. Some theories claim that it could be a medical treatise, a book on alchemy, or even an encyclopedia of ancient knowledge. Others suggest that it is a big joke from the past, a text invented to confuse anyone who read it. But if that were the case, why would someone spend so much time creating a fake writing system with such complex internal rules and drawing more than 200 pages in such detail? Over time, every possible method has been used to decipher the manuscript. During World War II, even military cryptographers who broke Nazi codes tried to decipher it without success. More recently, it has been analyzed using artificial intelligence, statistical models, and supercomputers. Some tools have managed to identify certain patterns that repeat as prefixes and suffixes, which suggests a coherent linguistic structure, but translating it remains impossible. One of the most enigmatic aspects is that the language of the manuscript does not resemble any known natural language. It shares no clear roots with Latin, Greek, Arabic, Hebrew, or any other language. It is as if it were written in a completely isolated language, created from scratch, but it does not give the impression of being a chaotic invention. It has regularity, style, and rules. The plants that appear in the drawings are also a great enigma. Some vaguely resemble real species, but none have been identified with certainty. There are flowers with impossible petals, leaves with shapes that do not exist in known botany, and structures that seem to mix parts of different species. This has led many to believe that the author of the manuscript had knowledge of biology, even if it was a completely unknown or symbolic biology. The astronomical and zodiacal diagrams in the book have also raised many questions. Stars, moons, concentric circles, and signs that could represent constellations or lunar cycles appear. Some pages show naked women entering and leaving circular bathtubs connected to each other by pipes. It was a representation of the cycle of life, a spiritual map, a medical system based on the stars. Some have proposed more extravagant theories. Some claim that the manuscript is of extraterrestrial origin. Others believe that it was channeled by a medium in a trance. There are also those who think that it was written by a lost civilization or that it is a record of forbidden knowledge that had to be kept hidden. And although these ideas sound incredible, The truth is that no one has been able to prove a specific hypothesis. Even the date of its creation was a mystery for a long time, but thanks to carbon-14 testing carried out in 2011, it was determined that the parchment on which the manuscript is written dates from the early 15th century, between 1404 and 1438. This places it in the heart of medieval Europe at a time when treatises on alchemy, medicine, and astrology were flourishing. However, this does not solve the mystery. It only makes it more intriguing. Why would someone in the Middle Ages create a book in a language that no one understands with illustrations that do not fit into any cultural context of the time? Nor is the author known. Many names have been suggested. Roger Bacon, an 11th century English monk and philosopher. Leonardo da Vinci, who had a penchant for codes, even secret groups such as the Rosicrucians or the Knights Templar. But no theory has sufficient evidence. The manuscript contains no signatures, dates, or clear references to identifiable people or places. Over the centuries, the book has passed through many hands. It was in private collections in monasteries, and for a time was owned by Emperor Rudolph I of the Holy Roman Empire, who is said to have paid a fortune for it, believing it contained hidden knowledge. Its historical journey is confusing, with periods when it disappeared completely from the record until it was rediscovered by Wilfrid Boynich in a Jesuit library in Rome in 1912. Since then, it has been the subject of hundreds of investigations. Books, documentaries, theories, and forums and academic conferences have been published. Each generation of researchers has attempted to solve the enigma with the tools of their time, but the manuscript continues to resist. No matter how advanced the technology or how many people study it, its message remains a complete mystery. And perhaps that is what makes it so fascinating. In a world where everything seems within reach, where any word can be translated with an app and any symbol can be analyzed with software, this book remains an impenetrable wall. It reminds us that there are still limits to our knowledge, and that human history is full of dark areas that we may never fully illuminate. The Boynich manuscript is not just a book. It is a mirror that reflects our obsession with understanding the unknown. Every attempt to decipher it is, at its core, a way of searching for meaning in chaos, of finding order in the incomprehensible. And even if we never manage to read it, even if we never discover what its pages say, its value lies not only in the answers it could give us, but in the questions it forces us to ask ourselves. The death of Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun is one of the best-known figures in ancient Egypt, not so much for what he did in life, but for what happened after his death. He was a young pharaoh, almost a child, who reigned for less than a decade and died before reaching the age of 20. But what has kept his name alive for more than 3,000 years is not his reign, but the mystery surrounding his death. Despite numerous investigations, forensic examinations, and theories over time, it is still not known with certainty how he died. Was he the victim of an accident or illness? Or did someone murder him? Tutankhamun ascended to the throne at the age of 9 at a very delicate time in the Egyptian Empire. His father, Pharaoh Akhenaten, had started a religious revolution by replacing the traditional cult with monotheism centered on the god Aten, which caused enormous political and social chaos. When Tutankhamun came to power, the priests of Ammonius and the traditional nobles took advantage of the situation to restore the previous order. It is believed that the young pharaoh was more of a figurehead than a ruler with real power, which in itself made him a vulnerable figure. He died around 1324 BC, and for a long time the exact cause of his death was a complete mystery. Nothing was known about his tomb until 1922, when British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered it in the Valley of the Kings. It was a monumental find because it was the tomb of a pharaoh that was practically intact. Jewelry, thrones, weapons, statues, war chariots, and of course, the famous solid gold funeral mask that has been seen around the world. But the most important thing was inside the sarcophagus, the mummified body of the pharaoh, with strange marks and in a state that baffled experts. For decades, Tutankhamun's mummy was studied by archaeologists and forensic scientists. In the 1960s, the first X-rays showed fractures in the skull, leading many to believe that he had been murdered. The idea of a palace conspiracy gained momentum. A young king without children in the midst of political strife could have been the victim of those who wanted power. Some pointed the finger at Ai, his vizier and successor, or General Ormeb, who also aspired to the throne. Intrigue, religious interests, and a power vacuum would have been the perfect breeding ground for a carefully covered-up crime. However, further studies began to cast doubt on this theory. In 2005, a team of Egyptian scientists performed a high-resolution CT scan. The results showed that the skull had not suffered a fatal blow, but that the fractures were probably the result of the mummification process or damage to the sarcophagus after centuries underground. But other clues were discovered, including a severe fracture in the left leg, just above the knee, which never healed. That injury could have caused a severe infection or even gangrene that ended his life. Traces of malaria were also found in his DNA, adding another layer of complexity to the case. And if it wasn't murder, but a combination of misfortunes. Today, the most widely accepted hypothesis is that Tutankhamun suffered from multiple health problems. He had a cleft palate, club foot, i.e., a deformed foot that prevented him from walking properly, and probably a hereditary bone disease. Some experts believe that his family practiced endogamy, i.e., marriages between close relatives, which could have caused an accumulation of genetic mutations. In fact, it is believed that his parents were siblings, which would have greatly increased the risk of congenital diseases. These conditions would have made Tutankhamun a fragile young man, physically weak and vulnerable to infections and injuries. The fracture in his leg could have been caused by a simple fall, and in a body weakened by disease and possibly malaria, that would have been enough to kill him. It was not murder, perhaps, but the tragic result of poor health in a dangerous environment. However, not everyone accepts this explanation. There are details that still don't add up. For example, the way he was buried. His mummification was rushed and poorly done. The body was subjected to oils at such a high temperature that it literally burned inside the sarcophagus, which was not normal in Egyptian funeral rituals. In addition, the grave goods seem improvised. Many of the objects were intended for someone else and were hastily reused. Even his coffin appears to have been made for someone else and then modified. This has led to speculation that his death was unexpected and that there was a rush to bury him, as if someone wanted to close the matter quickly. It is also striking that despite being a pharaoh, his name was erased from many official records. This was not common and is often associated with deliberate attempts to remove someone from history as punishment or for political reasons. Only centuries later did his name reappear in the royal lists. He was forgotten through negligence or silenced by those who benefited from his disappearance. On the other hand, his wife Anjinaman also disappeared from the map after his death. It is believed that she tried to ally herself with a foreign power, even writing to King It to send one of his sons to marry her. A letter in which an Egyptian queen asks for a foreign husband was found in the archives in Titus. Shortly afterwards, Prince Idida, who had traveled to Egypt, was assassinated. What was really happening in the Egyptian court after Tutankhamun's death? What forces were at play? The young pharaoh's life, marked by health problems and surrounded by powerful political interests, ended abruptly in circumstances that remain unclear. He was buried hastily, with borrowed objects in a tomb that seemed smaller than expected. Everything suggests a sudden, possibly unexpected death, but there is still room for doubt. The mystery remains unsolved. Today, more than 3,000 years later, Tutankhamun is the most famous pharaoh in the world, not for his laws or his conquests, but for his tomb and the enigma he left behind. His story continues to attract millions. His face, reconstructed with modern technology, shows a young man with delicate features, somewhat fragile, almost melancholic. And although we know more details than ever about his life and lineage, his death remains a blank page. Perhaps the most intriguing thing about the Tutankhamun case is not so much how he died, but why he continues to fascinate us today. Perhaps it is because it reminds us that even the most powerful, such as the pharaohs, can fall young and leave behind a sea of unanswered questions. Or perhaps it is because his story combines all the elements of a great mystery: power, betrayal, disease, ambition, and a centuries-old silence that we have not yet managed to break completely. The fate of the Amber Room. Imagine an entire room covered in golden amber, with walls that shine like the sun at sunset, gold inlays, carved mirrors, Baroque sculptures, and an air of opulence that seems straight out of a dream. Such was the legendary Amber Room, one of the most amazing artistic wonders in Europe. But this room, which for years was the symbol of imperial luxury, mysteriously disappeared during World War II, and no one has been able to find it since. Its fate remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of art and modern history. The history of the Amber Room begins in the 17th century. It was a diplomatic gift from the King of Prussia, Frederick William Alzer Peter the Great of Russia, as a symbol of alliance between the two countries. The original room had been designed by German craftsmen in 1701 and, upon arrival in Russia, was installed in the Catherine Palace in Tsarskoye Selo, near St. Petersburg. There it was enlarged, embellished, and transformed into a unique masterpiece. The entire room was decorated with amber panels in different shades, from warm gold to deep orange, combined with gold, semi-precious stones, and mirrors that reflected the light as if the room were alive. It was dubbed the eighth wonder of the world. For more than 2 centuries, the Amber Room was admired by visitors and dignitaries. But in 1941, everything changed. Nazi troops invaded the Soviet Union and advanced rapidly towards Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. On their way, they reached the Catherine Palace. Museum staff tried to dismantle the room to protect it, but amber, a fragile and brittle material, could not withstand the move. Unable to evacuate it, the workers covered the walls with wallpaper, tried to hide its value. It didn't work. The German soldiers knew exactly what they were looking for. When they occupied the palace, they found the Amber Room, dismantled it piece by piece with precision, and sent it to Königsberg, a German city located in what is now Kaliningrad. There it was installed in the city's castle and opened to the public as part of an exhibition of German power and glory. But that would be the last time anyone would see it complete. With the Red Army advancing towards the end of the war, the German authorities began to evacuate with Vicksburg. It is believed that in 1944, in the face of Soviet bombing and the chaos of the Nazi collapse, AR's chamber was once again packed up and hidden. But since then, all traces of it have been lost. Königsberg Castle was bombed, burned, and partially destroyed. Some believe that the room was consumed by flames. Others claim that it was secretly transported by train, truck, or ship to some hidden refuge. There are those who believe that it was sunk in the Baltic Sea. And there are also those who think that it is still hidden in some underground bunker waiting to be discovered. Since 1945, hundreds of investigations have been carried out. Treasure hunters, historians, governments, and adventurers have scoured Europe in search of clues. Tunnels in Poland, mines in Germany, underground fortresses in the Czech Republic, and even caves in Austria have been excavated in the hope of finding the original Amber Room panels. But so far, all that has been found are loose pieces, such as small fragments and isolated sculptures. Never the complete room. The mystery has only grown. In 1997, a small part of the original decoration reappeared in Germany when a man tried to sell a chest of drawers containing inlays from the Amber Room. The piece had belonged to his father, a Nazi soldier who had participated in the looting of Tsarskoye Selo. This discovery rekindled hopes that other parts may still be in private hands or hidden in some remote location. Amid this mystery, dark theories have also emerged. Some believe that the KGB knew more than it said and deliberately concealed information about the room's whereabouts. Others maintain that the Nazis destroyed it when they realized they could not keep it. There are even those who link its disappearance to secret societies esoteric artifacts, and curses. And as with all great enigmas, the longer it remains unsolved, the more myths arise around it. In the years 2000s, the Russian government decided to rebuild the Amber Room from scratch. Craftsmen and art experts worked for more than 2 decades to create an exact replica using old photographs, documents, and preserved fragments. In 2003, the new room was inaugurated in the same Catherine Palace and can now be visited as part of the museum. It is an impressive work that faithfully reproduces the splendor of the original, but it is not the original. The real Amber Room, the one that traveled from Prussia to Russia and then disappeared in the war, remains lost. Its fate remains shrouded in silence among the ruins of Königsberg Castle, at the bottom of the sea, or behind the walls of some forgotten building. Every year, new clues, investigations, documentaries, and rumors emerge, but none have managed to uncover the definitive truth. Why is this room so fascinating? Perhaps because it represents more than a work of art. It represents a moment in history when art fell victim to war, when beauty was looted, dismantled, and disappeared. Its absence is a symbol of what was lost in that brutal conflict, but is also a promise that there are still secrets waiting to be discovered. Today, the room is an echo of the past that continues to resonate in the present. A lost wonder that fuels the imagination of generations. A treasure that may never be recovered, or perhaps one day, when least expected, it will appear in an unexpected place. And at that moment, the mystery that has lasted more than 80 years will finally be solved. But until then, it will remain one of the most enigmatic disappearances of the modern world. The enigma of Stonehenge. In the middle of a quiet plain in Wiltshire, England, huge stones stand in a circle, arranged in an enigmatic pattern. Some are standing, others have fallen, and many form arch-shaped structures. These are the remains of what is known as Stonehenge, one of the most famous prehistoric monuments in the world, and also one of the most mysterious. Despite centuries of study, excavation, and debate, we still do not know for certain who built it, how they did it, or why. The Stonehenge complex was not built in one go. Its origins date back to around 3000 BC in the Neolithic period. However, some evidence suggests that the area was already used for ceremonial purposes even earlier. The construction of the monument, as we know it today, took more than 1,000 years. In other words, several generations participated in its creation, which already raises a profound question. What could be so important that an entire society would devote centuries to building it? Stonehenge is made up of several concentric rings of stones. The most impressive are the so-called Sarsen megaliths, each weighing up to 25 tons, arranged vertically and topped by horizontal stones. These giant rocks were transported from quarries more than 30 kilometers away. Even more enigmatic are the so-called blue stones, smaller but equally heavy, which come from the Preseli Mountains in Wales, almost 250 kilometers from Stonehenge. How is it possible that in an age without wheels, machinery, or pack animals as we know them today, such blocks could have been moved such long distances? There are many theories about how the stones were transported. Some propose the use of sleds and wooden rollers. Others suggest that they were dragged on paths of animal fat, ice, or even rafts across rivers. But no explanation is completely satisfactory, and every modern experimental attempt to replicate the feat has faced enormous difficulties. While not impossible, it requires a level of organization, human strength, and logistical knowledge that is surprising for such an ancient society. Then there is the challenge of how they were erected. Lifting stones weighing more than 20 tons and placing them precisely on top of each other requires not only strength, but also technical knowledge. Some archaeologists believe that ramps, rudimentary pulleys, or dugout trenches were used to tilt the rocks and then lift them. But the level of accuracy with which they are aligned, some perfectly coinciding with astronomical phenomena, such as the solstices, suggests something more than mere brute force. There seems to be a precise intention behind each stone, a purposeful design. And that's where the big question comes in. What was Ninj used for? Some think it was a sun temple. The alignment of its stones with the sunrise during the summer solstice and the sunset during the winter solstice is too exact to be a coincidence. Every year, thousands of people gather there to watch the sun pass through the megaliths, as if the builders had wanted to mark the cycles of the sky with stone. But if it was an astronomical observatory, what was that knowledge used for? Did they predict agricultural seasons? Were they linked to religious rituals or something else? Others believe it was a sacred burial site. Cremated human remains have been found around the monument, and some research suggests that Stonehenge was a burial site for important people for centuries. Perhaps leaders, shamans, or spiritual figures were buried there as part of an ancient cult related to death and eternity. There are also those who propose that it was a healing center. The blue stones brought from Wales were considered magical in some Celtic traditions. Their presence at Stonehenge could indicate that the sick were brought there in the hope of a cure. And if the monument was a sanctuary where body and soul could be restored. This idea gains strength when you consider the proximity of other archaeological sites, such as Dington Walls, where remains of banquets and dwellings have been found, as if it were a place where temporary pilgrimages were made for ceremonial purposes. Other more symbolic or esoteric theories speak of portals between worlds, maps of the stars, places of contact with the divine or with other dimensions. Some have even suggested that Stonehenge was built with the help of lost civilizations or extraterrestrial intelligence. These ideas, although difficult to prove, arise from the magnitude of the monument and the unanswered questions that surround it. What is fascinating is that unlike other ancient monuments, such as the pyramids of Egypt or the Mayan temples, there are no written records that tell us anything about Stonehenge. The people who built it left no words, only stone, and stones do not speak. Everything we know comes from excavations, geological analysis, skeletal remains, solar alignments, and many interpretations. In the absence of texts, Stonehenge becomes a kind of mirror where each researcher projects their own theory. In recent decades, archaeology has made great strides in the study of the monument. Underground maps of the terrain have been made, revealing that Stonehenge was not alone, but part of a vast ceremonial complex. There are other structures aligned with it, ancient paths, wooden circles that no longer exist but left traces in the ground, and sites that may have served as passageways or ritual stations. Everything suggests that what we see today is only part of something much larger. A sacred landscape where life and death, heaven and earth were deeply connected. And yet, the questions remain. Who had the idea to start it? What motivated an entire society to devote generations to building it? How did people feel when they entered that circle of giant stones? Was it fear, respect, hope, faith? What happened inside during the rituals? What stories did the stones tell when the sun bathed them at dawn? Stonehenge has inspired artists, poets, musicians, and mystics for centuries. Its presence commands silence. Even in the 21st century, surrounded by visitors, roads, and technology, it remains a place where time seems to stand still. You stand in front of these stones, touch them, observe them, and can't help but wonder, why? For whom? Perhaps that is the true power of Stonehenge. It is not only in its construction or its age, but in its ability to continue to baffle us. In a world saturated with information, where everything seems to have an explanation, this circle of stones continues to resist. It remains a mystery in the middle of the countryside, an undeciphered message written in stone blocks, a legacy of a civilization that spoke to the sky and left its mark on the earth. Stonehenge is not just a structure, it is an open question. And perhaps part of its magic lies precisely in that, in the fact that we will never have all the answers. The lost city of Atlantis. The story of Atlantis is undoubtedly one of the greatest enigmas of humanity. For more than 2,000 years, it has fascinated philosophers, explorers, scientists, and dreamers. There's talk of an advanced civilization with technology, knowledge, and power that surpassed the rest of the ancient world. A majestic city surrounded by concentric rings of land and water, rich in resources, protected by a powerful army, and guided by wise laws. And then suddenly, a cataclysm, a day and night of disaster. The city sinks beneath the waters and disappears forever. Myth or reality, fiction or a distorted memory of something that really happened. The truth is that more than 2,000 years after Plato first spoke of it, we still do not know for sure. It all began in the dialogues Timaeus and Critias written by Plato around 360 BC. There, the Greek philosopher describes a civilization that existed some 9,000 years before his time. According to him, the story was originally told by Egyptian priests to the wise Solon, and then passed down through generations until it reached Plato. In the story, Atlantis was a large island located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, that is, beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, in what is now the Atlantic Ocean. It was a formidable power with a splendid city. Built in concentric circles, advanced ports, temples of gold, and a society that combined the spiritual with the material. But over time, the Atlanteans became arrogant, stopped honoring the laws, and began to seek conquest. They decided to invade Europe and Asia. And that was when they faced the Athenians, who, according to Plato, defeated them heroically. Shortly thereafter, as divine punishment for their pride, the entire island was shaken by earthquakes and floods and sank into the sea. Thus, Atlantis disappeared, leaving behind only stories, doubts, and a mystery that is yet to be solved. Since Plato wrote his dialogues, the question has remained the same. Did Atlantis really exist, or was it just an allegory? For many historians, the story was symbolic, a warning about what happens when a society becomes corrupted by power and forgets its values. Plato, as a philosopher, had a moral and political purpose. However, the level of detail in his descriptions, the geography, the social structure, and the natural resources described have led others to believe that it may have been based on a real civilization, although perhaps modified or exaggerated over time. Over the centuries, dozens of theories have emerged about where Atlantis might have been. Some have suggested that it was an island in the Atlantic that disappeared due to a seaquake. Others believe it was Santorini, ancient Thera, a Greek island that suffered a devastating volcanic eruption around 1600 BC, destroying part of the Minoan civilization. This theory is one of the most widely accepted, as the catastrophe coincides with a great cultural and geographical destruction, and the Minoans had an advanced society for their time. Others have looked to Spain. Some researchers have pointed to the Dinanum marshes in Andalusia as a possible location for an ancient city destroyed by a great flood. In recent years, aerial photographs and geological studies have identified circular structures in that area that resemble Plato's description. Could Atlantis have been in what is now southern Spain? There are also theories that point to America, suggesting that Plato, through Egyptian sources, was actually talking about a continent unknown to the Greeks. Others, even more daring, place Atlantis in Antarctica, claiming that a pole shift would have hidden the city under the ice. Of course, these ideas are highly contested and lack solid evidence, but they show the extent to which this myth has captured the imagination of millions. Atlantis is not just an archaeological mystery, it is a symbol. It represents the idea of a lost civilization that reached an exceptional level of development only to fall because of its arrogance. It is a warning about human pride, but also a fantasy of what we could become. In many ways, Atlantis is a mirror. It shows us both our desire for glory and our fear of destruction. In the 19th and 20th centuries, with the rise of spiritualism and esoteric literature, the legend of Atlantis took a new turn. Authors such as Helena Blavatsky and Edgar Cayce claim to have received visions of Atlantis. Cayce, for example, said that the Atlanteans had energy crystals, anti-gravity technology, and flying ships. His claims, though unsupported by science, were very popular and continue to fuel many alternative theories to this day. On the other hand, modern science has attempted to separate myth from reality. Archaeologists have studied marine sediments, submerged structures, remains of vanished civilizations, and even tectonic movements to find clues. But so far, there is no conclusive evidence to confirm the existence of a city like the one described by Plato. There are also no Egyptian records of such a civilization or clear archaeological traces. And yet, the mystery lives on. Perhaps part of Atlantis' power lies precisely in its ambiguity. We do not have enough evidence to confirm it, but neither can we rule it out completely. And that opens a huge door for imagination, speculation, literature, cinema, and a human desire to discover something lost in time. Atlantis has appeared in novels, films, video games, documentaries, and conspiracy theories. It has been linked to aliens, underwater civilizations, parallel dimensions, and secrets hidden by governments. All this shows that beyond its physical existence, Atlantis has become a cultural phenomenon. Perhaps Plato never meant for us to take it literally. Perhaps he used a fictional story to teach a lesson about politics, morality, and the fragility of civilizations. But it is also possible that his account was based on vague memories of a real disaster, passed down through generations, distorted over time, and eventually turned into legend. Today we continue to search the depths of the ocean, ancient archives, submerged ruins, and forgotten hills. The idea of an advanced city lost at sea continues to awaken the spirit of exploration in us. Because deep down, we all want to believe that there is more than meets the eye, that the past still holds secrets, that not everything has been discovered. Atlantis, real or not, invites us to look beyond the obvious, to imagine the impossible, and to never stop searching. In a world where every corner seems to have already been mapped, the possibility of a lost civilization hidden beneath the waters reminds us that there are still mysteries to be solved. And perhaps that is its most powerful legacy, keeping the spark of human curiosity alive. The Piri Reis map. In 1929, during renovations at Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, Turkey, a fragment of ancient parchment was discovered. It was a nautical map drawn in colored ink on gazelle skin. At first glance, it looked like just another document from the age of great explorers. But upon closer inspection, something didn't add up. The map showed surprising geographical details, including parts of South America and an intriguing representation of the Antarctic continent centuries before official discoveries were made in those regions. It had been created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. And since its discovery, this piece of parchment has become one of the greatest cartographic mysteries in history. Piri Reis was no ordinary cartographer. He was a respected admiral in the Ottoman fleet, knowledgeable about Mediterranean sea routes, and the author of a famous navigation book called Kitab Baril. His map, dated 1513, is signed by him. In the inscriptions, Piri explains that he created it using some 20 sources, including Arab, Indian, Portuguese, and at least one from the time of Alexander the Great. He even claims that among his sources was a map drawn up by Christopher Columbus, adding an even deeper level of historical mystery. The map depicts the western coast of Africa, the eastern part of South America, and some Atlantic islands such as the Azores and the Canary Islands. So far, nothing particularly strange. What has really baffled historians and geographers is the lower part of the map, a representation of a landmass that, according to many, appears to match the northern coast of Antarctica without ice. This is puzzling because Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, more than 300 years after Piri Reis drew his map. Even more puzzling is that what appears there seems to correspond not to the current shape of the ice-covered continent, but to its underlying coastline, which has only been possible to map in modern times using technology such as ground-penetrating radar or satellite imagery. How could someone in the 10th century have known about these geographical features? This question has spawned all kinds of theories. Some researchers propose that Pyre Race's map is a copy of a much older document, produced by a lost civilization that had advanced knowledge of geography and navigation. Others suggest that it could be a simple coincidence or a modern misinterpretation. Skeptics point out that what has been identified as Antarctica could simply be an artistic extension of the coast of South America, with errors common in maps of that era. However, those who defend the authenticity of the mystery point out that the curvature, orientation, and shape of the territory drawn resemble ice-free Antarctica too closely to be the result of chance. Furthermore, the annotations that Pyre Reese made on the map are just as intriguing. In one of the texts, he states that the lands depicted were explored by ancient navigators and that there were strange animals there. He also mentions sea creatures, mythological references, and unknown peoples. This suggests that beyond a technical document, the map contains elements of oral stories, lost traditions, and inherited knowledge that have not survived intact to the present day. Proponents of the advanced civilizations theory argue that the map could be one of the few remaining pieces of evidence of vanished cultures with a knowledge of the world far superior to that attributed to them. There is talk of Atlantis, of prehistoric seafaring peoples, and even of transoceanic contacts prior to the Vikings or Columbus. Some even link the map to advanced astronomical knowledge and navigation routes aligned with the stars. There are also those who relate the map to more extreme theories. Some claim that it is evidence of extraterrestrial contact, or that there was ancient technology capable of mapping the Earth from the sky. These ideas, although popular in pseudoscientific literature, have no academic backing, but they show how the map by Pyre and Ray has aroused interest beyond the circles of historians. In the scientific field, multiple studies have been carried out to verify the accuracy of the map. One of the most famous was carried out in the 1960s by American engineer Charles Abgo, who proposed that Antarctica had been mapped before it was covered by ice. According to his hypothesis, a change in the Earth's crust could have shifted Antarctica from a more temperate zone to the South Pole, freezing it quickly. Abgo suggested that ancient maps, such as Pyre Reese, could have been drawn when Antarctica was still habitable. This theory was even popularized by Albert Einstein, who wrote the foreword to Abgo's book. Although modern geology today rejects this theory, the idea captured the public's imagination. In reality, it is difficult to establish how much Pyre Reese knew about what he was drawing. He himself admits that his map is a compilation of earlier sources. Perhaps he did not even fully understand what some parts of the map represented. He may have faithfully copied what others had drawn centuries earlier, without knowing the true meaning. And that is precisely what makes it such a fascinating document, because it is like a window into lost knowledge, an echo of maps that no longer exist, of stories that did not reach us. The historical context must also be taken into account. In 1513, Europe was in the midst of the Age of Discovery. New maps were being drawn with each expedition, and naval powers were vying for control of the world. Geographical information was power. Some believe that the Portuguese, for example, hid maps to keep their trade routes secret. It is possible that some of the knowledge contained in Pyre and Reese map came from these secret maps that were never officially printed. Columbus himself is said to have based his voyage on similar documents, according to many sources. Today, the map is kept in the Topkapi Palace, and only part of the original has survived. The complete document is believed to have been much larger and to have depicted more regions of the world. What has been lost could have contained even more mysteries, but what remains is already enough to baffle us. Pyre Reese map reminds us that history is not a straight line. There are gaps, losses, discoveries that were ahead of their time, and knowledge that vanished without explanation. It also invites us to question the traditional narrative. What if there were advanced civilizations that disappeared without a trace? What if some ancient knowledge was ignored or destroyed? What if we're only seeing the surface of a much deeper history? Whatever the truth may be, Pyre Reese map is more than just a drawing. It is a living relic, a message in a bottle sent from the past that challenges us to look beyond what we think we know. It tells us of lost connections, forgotten maps, and a world that still holds secrets in its darkest corners. And as long as we continue to look at it with curious eyes, the mystery will live on. The treasure of the Knights Templar. For centuries, a legend has fascinated historians, archaeologists, adventurers, and writers. The mystery of the lost treasure of the Knights Templar. It is an incalculable fortune that supposedly disappeared when the powerful Order of the Temple was dissolved in the 14th century. But beyond the gold and riches, this story holds secrets, betrayals, conspiracies, and unanswered questions that remain relevant to this day. Did this treasure really exist? Was it hidden? What if it is still hidden, waiting to be discovered? To understand the origin of the mystery, we must first learn about the Knights Templar. The Order of the Temple was founded in 1119 in Jerusalem by a small group of Christian knights. Their initial mission was to protect European pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, but over time the order grew in power and influence. Within a few years, the Knights Templar were not only a feared military force, but also an organization with an impressive financial network spanning all of Europe. The order accumulated wealth of all kinds, including land donations, castles, livestock, gold, sacred relics, and spoils of war. They were pioneers of what we would now understand as an international banking system. They allowed nobles and kings to deposit their wealth at a Templar headquarters and withdraw it in another city or country by means of a kind of bill of exchange. This financial capacity gave them enormous influence in political, military, and economic affairs, but power also breeds enemies. At the beginning of the 14th century, King Philip IV of France, nicknamed the Fair, was deeply in debt to the Templars. At the same time, the order no longer had the same military role in the Crusades and was beginning to be seen as a threat by the Church and European monarchs. Then something brutal happened. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, Philip ordered the mass arrest of all Templars in France. It was a perfectly coordinated operation. Accusations of heresy, blasphemy, idolatry, and secret practices were brought against the order. Under torture, many confessed what their inquisitors wanted to hear. Pope Clement V, under pressure from the French king, officially dissolved the order in 1312. Its last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned alive in 1314. But in the midst of this process, something happened that sparked centuries of theories. The enormous Templar treasure disappeared. In the days leading up to the arrests, some documents suggest that the Templars moved part of their wealth from Paris to unknown locations. According to some reports, several carts left the central headquarters. Temple headquarters in the French capital under maximum security, carrying chests whose contents were never recorded. Where are they going? What exactly did they contain, and why were they not intercepted? Since then, dozens of theories have emerged about the whereabouts of the treasure. One of the most famous is that it was hidden in the French region of Languedoc, where the Templars had numerous fortresses and castles. Another rumor says that it was taken to Scotland, where the order would have found refuge after its persecution. There are those who believe that part of the treasure ended up in Switzerland, which would explain that country's subsequent banking tradition. There has even been speculation that the Templars escaped with their riches to America long before Columbus' voyage. But what did this supposed treasure really contain? Some imagine gold, jewels, diamond crosses, and chalices carved from emeralds. But others believe that the true treasure of the Knights Templar was not material, but spiritual or intellectual. Secret documents, forbidden gospels, sacred relics, such as the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant. These ideas, fueled by novels and films, have elevated the myth to almost mystical proportions. The connection between the Templars and sacred relics is key to many of the legends. For example, it is said that during their stay in Jerusalem, the Knights Templar excavated under the Temple Mount, the ancient site of Solomon's Temple. There they may have found sacred objects from Judaism or early Christianity. If that were true, it is Understandable that they would guard them so zealously and even hide them when their existence was threatened. Another popular theory is that the treasure was divided up and hidden in various Templar command posts across Europe. Some research points to crypts under churches in Portugal, Spain, or England. In fact, some Templar castles on the Iberian Peninsula show signs of having been suddenly and orderly vacated, as if they had been emptied in the face of imminent danger. There are also documents indicating that certain Templars escaped on ships from French ports to unknown destinations. There is talk of a supposed Templar fleet that set sail loaded with riches, relics, and high-ranking members. The fate of that fleet, if it ever existed, remains a mystery. And if part of the Templar treasure crossed the Atlantic, although there is no solid evidence, this idea has been defended by some authors who link Templar symbols with pre-Columbian American cultures. Even in America, there are legends that connect mysterious ruins with the Templars. Some claim to have found Templar symbols in caves in Canada or in certain engravings in Central America. Although most experts consider these to be coincidences or inventions, the myth continues to grow. In modern times, treasure hunters have tried to find traces of the treasure in places as varied as the island of Oka, the French Pyrenees, caves in Scotland, and castles in Portugal. Some have dedicated their entire lives to this search, spending fortunes, combing through medieval archives, deciphering ancient maps, and excavating remote areas. So far, no one has found definitive proof, but every partial discovery, every engraved symbol, every forgotten document rekindles hope. What if the treasure never existed? What if it was just an exaggeration, a mixture of real riches and mythology that grew over time? Even if that were the case, the story of the Templars and their downfall remains one of the most shocking of the Middle Ages. An organization that went from being a defender of the faith to a victim of political power, betrayed, tortured, and stripped of everything. The myth of the Templar treasure represents more than a search for gold. It is a metaphor for a legacy that was tragically lost. It represents the conflict between spirituality and ambition, between faith and greed, between the idealism of a chivalric order and the brutality of medieval politics. That is why, even if not a single chest is ever found, the Templar treasure continues to fascinate, because it speaks of what? We are beings who seek, who doubt, who wonder if there is something beyond the visible. Perhaps one day, among the stones of an ancient abbey, in a forgotten tunnel, or under the waters of a medieval port, someone will find a definitive clue. Perhaps not. But in the meantime, the mystery lives on, like an echo from another era, waiting for someone to unravel it. The Nazca Lines. In the middle of the arid desert of southern Peru, between the pampas of Nazca and Palpa, gigantic figures are carved into the surface of the earth. They are straight lines, spirals, geometric figures, and also drawings of animals, plants, and human beings. Some are hundreds of meters long. The most striking thing is that they can only be seen in their entirety from the sky, as if they had been designed to be viewed from above. Despite decades of study, archaeological research, scientific theories, and esoteric speculation, the true purpose of these enigmatic lines remains a mystery. The so-called Nazca Lines were formally discovered in the 20th century when airplanes began flying over the area. But their existence was known to local residents long before that. The figures are formed by removing the surface layer of the desert, which is composed of dark stones covered with iron oxide. Removing these stones exposes the lighter-colored soil beneath, creating a visible contrast. What is surprising is that despite the passage of time, more than 1,000 years, the lines remain intact. This is due to the extreme conditions of the desert, one of the driest regions in the world, with no rain, no strong winds, and a stable temperature. The total area where these figures are found covers more than 500 square kilometers, more than 800 straight lines, 300 geometric figures, and around 70 drawings of animals and plants have been identified. Among the most famous geoglyphs are the hummingbird, the monkey, the spider, the condor, the dog, the fish, the tree, and the owl man. also known as the astronaut. Some of these figures have such precise proportions and symmetry that it is difficult to imagine how they were drawn without modern tools or the ability to see them from the air. The people responsible for these works are the Nazca culture, which flourished between 200 BC and 600 AD. This civilization developed advanced agriculture, complex underground irrigation systems known as puquios, and richly decorated pottery. But their most amazing legacy, and the one that has most intrigued the world, is undoubtedly these lines on the desert floor. How did the Nazca people manage to design such large figures with such precision? One of the explanations most accepted by archaeologists is that they used simple but effective tools, wooden stakes, ropes, and geometric calculations. In fact, remains of these stakes have been found in several lines, suggesting that they marked points and then connected them with ropes to draw straight lines. By extending this technique and expanding the scale, they were able to create the most complex shapes. Even so, the technical skill and overall vision involved in these figures continue to generate admiration. But beyond how they were made, the big question is why? What was the purpose of these giant lines in the desert? One of the first researchers to study the lines systematically was Maria Reich, a German mathematician and archaeologist who devoted her life to the study of these figures. Reich proposed that the lines were a giant astronomical calendar. According to her research, many of the lines and figures were aligned with celestial phenomena, such as solstices, equinoxes, or specific positions of the sun and stars. For the Nazca culture, which depended heavily on the agricultural cycle, observing the sky and knowing the precise time to sow and harvest was essential. Under this interpretation, the lines would be a way of measuring time through the movement of the sky. However, not all researchers agree with this hypothesis. Other studies have indicated that many of the proposed alignments are not as accurate as previously thought, or that they are too numerous to be due to chance. Furthermore, most of the drawings do not appear to have a clear astronomical function, which opens the door to other interpretations. One of the most influential theories holds that the lines were part of religious rituals. It is believed that the Nazca walked on these lines during ceremonies to invoke rain or worship their gods. Given that they lived in an extremely dry environment, water was their most precious commodity, and many of their practices were focused on securing it. Some lines lead to water sources or follow the direction of ancient underground channels. From this point of view, the figures were not meant to be seen from the sky, but to be walked on, experienced as part of a spiritual or communal experience. There are also theories that suggest that the lines marked processional routes between sacred places, such as ceremonial centers. Mountains or wakas. In the Andean worldview, mountains were considered sacred beings, protectors, and sources of life. The roads could have been a way of connecting the human world with the world of the gods. In fact, some lines are oriented towards specific peaks on the horizon, reinforcing this idea. Of course, there are also more speculative interpretations. One of the most popular is the ancient astronaut theory, defended by authors such as Eric von Daniken. According to this view, the lines were built as signals for extraterrestrial beings or even as landing strips for their ships. This idea, although widely disseminated in popular culture, lacks scientific support. No serious archaeological evidence has been found to suggest contact with non-terrestrial civilizations, but the mystery of why the lines can only be fully appreciated from the air continues to fuel such theories. The truth is that, to date, there is no definitive explanation that clarifies the true purpose of all the Nazca lines. It is likely that they do not have a single function. Some may have had astronomical value, others may have been part of religious rituals, and others may have marked routes or territories. What we do know is that their creation involved planning, social organization, technical knowledge, and a complex worldview. In recent decades, advances in technology have led to the discovery of new figures. Drones, satellites, and high-resolution scans have revealed geoglyphs that remained hidden for centuries. Many of these figures are smaller or more eroded, but their discovery shows that the legacy of the Nazca people has not yet been fully revealed. The current problem is conservation. Although the dry climate has protected the lines for centuries, urban growth, uncontrolled tourism, and illegal mining have begun to threaten them. In 2014, a group of activists severely damaged a figure by walking on it. There have also been accidents involving vehicles that left permanent marks on the desert surface. Peruvian authorities have implemented protective measures, but the balance between conservation and tourist access remains delicate. Today, the Nazca Lines remain one of humanity's most impressive cultural legacies. They have been declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site and each year attract thousands of visitors and scholars from around the world. But beyond their tourist appeal, or visual impact, these figures remain a testament to human ingenuity, to our ability to create symbols that transcend time. They are an open letter from the past, a silent voice that we have not yet fully deciphered. They remind us that there were civilizations that looked to the sky, that understood the earth, that walked the desert with a purpose that still eludes us. And perhaps that mystery is their true strength. Because as long as we continue to wonder why they were made, we will remain connected to those who created them. We will be part of the same human desire that has existed since the beginning of time, leaving a mark on the world, even if no one can see it from the ground. The mystery of the Library of Alexandria. In the coastal city of Alexandria, Egypt, there once existed a place that brought together the knowledge of the ancient world, the legendary Library of Alexandria. It was much more than a building full of scrolls. It was a symbol of the human desire to understand the universe. For centuries, it housed texts on science, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, history, poetry, and religion, written in Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Persian, Sanskrit, and other languages. Its disappearance, shrouded in fire and confusion, is one of the greatest intellectual tragedies in history. But even more mysterious is imagining all that was lost with it. Theories, discoveries, and thoughts that could have advanced our knowledge by centuries. The Library of Alexandria was founded in the 3rd century BC during the reign of Ptolemy and Soter, one of Alexander the Great's generals who inherited Egypt after the conqueror's death. Its goal was ambitious, to gather all the books in the world in one place. To achieve this, the Ptolemaic rulers sent emissaries to Greece, Asia, Africa, and India to acquire any valuable writings. They copied original texts, bought entire collections, and even retained manuscript from ships docking in Alexandria to make copies before returning them. It is estimated that at its peak, the library contained between 400,000 and 700,000 papyrus scrolls. But the library was not just an archive, it was a center of learning, a university, a beacon of scientific research. Associated with the Mausoleum, a kind of academy inspired by the Muses, it was home to philosophers, poets, doctors, astronomers, mathematicians, and scholars from all over the Hellenistic world. Figures such as Aristarchus of Samos, who proposed that the Earth revolved around the Sun, Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the planet with surprising accuracy, Parco, a pioneer of trigonometry, and Herophilus, one of the first to dissect human corpses to study anatomy, worked there. Imagine a place where scientists debated atoms, the Earth's rotation, and the nature of the universe. Of the planet, Parcus, a pioneer of trigonometry, and Herophilus, one of the first to dissect human corpses to study anatomy. Imagine a place where scientists debated atoms, gravity, planets, human medicine, and pure mathematics centuries before these ideas took hold in the West. That place existed and was destroyed. But when? How and by whom? Unlike other historical events, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria does not have a single date or person responsible. Rather, it seems to have been a series of catastrophes accumulated over centuries. There are several theories, each with its own historical weight. The first significant loss may have occurred in 48 BC, during the civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey. According to Plutarch's account, when Caesar besieged Alexandria, he ordered the enemy's ships in the harbor to be set on fire. The fire spread and reached part of the city. possibly including the book repository next to the harbor. Some historians believe that this fire destroyed a significant part of the collection, although probably not all of it. Another critical period occurred during the 3rd century AD under the reign of Emperor Aurelian. During his struggle to recapture Alexandria from Queen Zenobia of Palmyra, parts of the city were razed to the ground. It is likely that more sections of the library were lost. Then later, in 391, under the Christian Emperor Theodosius, the Serapeum, which served as an annex to the library, was destroyed by a Christian mob led by Bishop Theophilus. Christianity was eliminating the remnants of paganism, and texts that did not align with the new faith were considered dangerous. This event is marked by some as a final blow to the classical knowledge stored in Alexandria. Finally, in 642, when Muslim Arabs conquered Egypt under the command of General Emerinas, a later legend, whose veracity is highly debated, claims that Caliph Omar ordered the destruction of what remained of the library. He supposedly said, "If the books agree with the Quran, we don't need them. If they disagree, they are dangerous." However, this story was written centuries later and lacks firm evidence. Many scholars believe that by then there was not much left of the original library. In short, the Library of Alexandria was not destroyed in one fell swoop, but slowly erased by wars, fires, religious fanaticism, neglect, and the passage of time. The most tragic thing is that, since there are no complete records of its contents, we will never know exactly what was lost. What we can do is imagine what knowledge those scrolls contained, what scientific advances were discovered and then forgotten, what literary works were lost forever. Some speculate that the ancients already had concepts of electricity, the steam engine, or blood circulation. The famous Antikythera mechanism discovered at the bottom of the sea in Greece shows that the Greeks had complex mechanical technology centuries earlier than previously thought. If such devices existed, it is reasonable to assume that their designs were recorded somewhere, perhaps in Alexandria. It is also thought that many lost works by classical authors such as Sophocles, Aeschylus, Euripides, and other writers, historians, and philosophers of the ancient world were there. There is talk of dozens of tragedies, comedies, scientific treatises, and religious texts from cultures in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Aristotle himself, whose work influenced the entire history of Western thought, is said to have had a complete copy of his works in a library, including manuscripts that have since disappeared. The loss of the library was not just the loss of books. It was the loss of the continuity of knowledge. Many discoveries had to be rediscovered centuries later, sometimes with great effort, sometimes never completely. Humanity took steps forward, but it also took steps backward. The mystery of the Library of Alexandria remains relevant because it is not just a tragedy of the past, but an eternal warning. It shows us how fragile knowledge is if it is not preserved. It reminds us that intolerance, fanaticism, war, and neglect can extinguish centuries of wisdom in a matter of days. Today, many modern libraries are inspired by its spirit. The Library of Alexandria was symbolically rebuilt in 2002 under the name Bibliotheca Alexandrina, in an effort to restore the ideal of a universal center of knowledge. But no matter how much the building is rebuilt, the original contents are lost forever. And that is what makes its story so powerful, because it represents both what we were capable of achieving and what we were capable of destroying, because in its invisible ruins lie the ideas that might have changed the course of humanity. And because perhaps in some forgotten corner of the world, a single original scroll from Alexandria still waits to be found. The ship Mary Celeste. On December 4th, 1872, a merchant ship called the Mary Celeste was found adrift in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, about 600 kilometers off the coast of Portugal. The vessel was in perfect condition with its cargo intact and its sails partially hoisted. There was enough food and drinking water for several months, but there was something disturbing. There was not a single crew member on board, no signs of a struggle, no visible damage, and no trace of the 10 crew members who were supposed to be there. The mystery of the Mary Celeste was born at that moment, and has since become one of the most baffling enigmas in maritime history. The ship, a two-masted schooner, had departed from New York Harbor on November 7th, 1872. Its destination was Genoa, Italy, and it was carrying a cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol. On board were Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter, and a crew of 7 experienced men. There were no signs of trouble before setting sail. The ship was in good condition, the weather was favorable, and the cargo was secured. Captain Briggs was known for his disciplined character and deep religious faith. Everything seemed in order. On December 5th, the Agracia, a British vessel that had left the same port a few days earlier, sighted the Mary Celeste sailing erratically near the Azores. Upon boarding, the sailors found a disturbing scene. The rudder was unattended, the sails damaged but still functional, the cargo almost complete, and the crew's personal effects in place. There were dishes set, objects on the beds, clothes hanging. It was as if everyone had disappeared in the middle of their daily activities. The lifeboat was missing, suggesting that they had abandoned the ship voluntarily. But why? What force or fear could have driven an experienced crew to abandon a safe ship in the middle of the ocean? Over the years, many theories have been put forward to try to explain what happened. Some are rational, others border on the supernatural. None have completely solved the mystery. One of the most widely accepted theories is that there was a leak of gas or vapors from the alcohol being transported. Industrial alcohol is highly flammable, and although no signs of an explosion were found, there were 9 empty barrels, suggesting that there may have been some kind of leak. According to this idea, a gas explosion could have caused a mass panic. Perhaps there was a small detonation with no visible flames, enough to make people think the ship was going to explode. The captain, fearing a catastrophe, may have ordered the ship to be abandoned with the idea of staying close by in a lifeboat until it was safe to return. But if a sudden storm or strong winds drove them away, they could no longer return. The relentless sea swallowed them up without a trace. Another hypothesis points to a meteorological phenomenon. Some have suggested that a waterspout, a kind of tornado over the water, may have violently shaken the ship, causing minor damage and creating the impression that a deadly storm was approaching. Or perhaps a giant wave swept over the deck, dragging one or more crew members overboard, and the others jumped into the boat in a desperate attempt to rescue them. There are also more humane theories. Some historians have pointed to a possible mutiny or internal conflict. However, there were no signs of violence on board, and all personal belongings and valuables were in place. There were also no signs of theft, making betrayal among the crew unlikely. Another possibility considered was piracy. At that time, attacks on the high seas still existed, but again, the ship showed no signs of a struggle, and no provisions or valuable goods were missing. Even the captain's money was still in his cabin. In addition, the lifeboat appeared to have been used in an orderly manner, reinforcing the idea of a voluntary and unforced evacuation. During the official investigation in Gibraltar, the authorities thoroughly examined the ship. Some officers suspected the crew of the Agracia, suggesting that they may have murdered the crew of the Mary Celeste to claim the ransom reward. However, no evidence was found to support the accusation, and the rescuers were eventually paid, albeit with a lower compensation than usual, reflecting the lingering doubts. Over the years, the mystery of the Mary Celeste grew. Writers such as Arthur Conan Doyle fueled the legend with fictional accounts based on the case, adding dramatic and supernatural elements. There is talk of alien abductions, sea monsters, and secret experiments. Some versions even claim that the ship was cursed, that it was the victim of invisible forces, or that its crew crossed some kind of interdimensional threshold. These theories, although lacking scientific basis, have kept the mystery alive in popular culture. In recent times, some researchers have explored the possibility of navigational errors. It has been suggested that Captain Briggs may have misjudged the distance to shore due to a faulty chronometer, believing they were closer to land than they actually were. This would have led to a premature evacuation with the intention of reaching land in the lifeboat. But this theory also fails to explain why a seaworthy ship would be abandoned without serious signs of distress. Most puzzling is that no remains of the crew or the lifeboat were ever found. The ocean is vast and unforgiving, and if the boat was swept away by the current, it is possible that it sank without a trace. But even today, with advances in marine research, no one has found a single definitive clue as to what happened to those 10 people. The Mary Celeste continued sailing after the incident. It was repaired and sold several times, but many captains refused to command it, believing it to be cursed. Finally, in 1885, its last owner attempted to sink it intentionally near Haiti to collect the insurance money. He was discovered and arrested for fraud, and the ship was destroyed. Thus ended the physical history of the Mary Celeste, but its legend was just beginning. Today, the case remains an enigma. There is no consensus, no definitive explanation. Perhaps it was a combination of factors: a gas leak, fear of fire, weather conditions, and error in judgment. The only thing that is clear is that something happened on the high seas that led an entire crew to abandon a ship in good condition and disappear forever. The mystery of the Mary Celeste persists because it confronts us with the unknown. It reminds us that even in an age of maps, compasses, and navigation, the sea remains an unpredictable place, full of secrets. It is a symbol of how fragile human life can be in the face of the forces of nature and how limited our understanding of the world still is. Meanwhile, the Mary Celeste continues to sail in the collective memory, driven by the imagination and the human desire to know what really happened that day in the waters of the Atlantic. A mystery suspended in time, intact like the ship that floated empty under the sun. The Philadelphia experiment. In modern history, there are certain stories that, although never fully proven, have managed to fascinate and disturb generations. One of the most disturbing is the so-called Philadelphia experiment, an alleged secret experiment carried out by the United States Navy in 1943 during World War II. According to this account, an attempt was made to render a warship invisible using advanced technology based on electromagnetic fields. But the result, according to witnesses, was a disaster. Disappearances, physical distortions, mental problems, bodies melted into the steel of the ship, a failed military breakthrough, a real experiment covered up, or simply a myth that got out of control. At the center of this story is the USS Eldridge, a Cannon-class escort destroyer that was officially commissioned in July 1943. The most widely known theory claims that in October of that same year, the ship was subjected to an experiment at the Philadelphia Naval Yard. The goal was to make it invisible to enemy radar using technology derived from Albert Einstein's work on the unified field. But something went very wrong. The Eldridge not only became invisible to radar, but physically disappeared, only to reappear elsewhere at the Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia, hundreds of miles away, and then return to Philadelphia. The best-known testimony about this alleged experiment comes from a man named Carl M. Allen, who signed letters under the pseudonym Carlos Miguel Allende. In the late 1950s, Allen sent a series of letters to a science fiction writer named Morris Kayep, who had published a book on UFOs and unconventional scientific theories. In these letters, Allen claimed to have witnessed the experiment from a nearby ship. He wrote how the USS Eldridge disappeared into a blue-green field and then reappeared with serious consequences for the crew. According to his account, some sailors were left with severe burns, others lost their sanity, and most disturbingly, some were found partially fused with the metal structure of the ship, trapped alive inside the hull. Others disappeared completely. He also mentioned that many of the survivors suffered from time lag syndrome, meaning they were out of sync with reality, experiencing episodes of momentary disappearance or extreme disorientation. These claims were so shocking that they led Jessup to investigate further. However, his career was affected, and his death in 1959 officially ruled as suicide, added a new level of mystery to the story. At the same time, the case caught the attention of the Naval Research Office, which received an annotated version of Jessup's book with comments on the experiment, UFOs, and advanced physical theories. This document, known as the Barrow Edition, was printed in a few copies and remains the subject of speculation to this day. Over time, the Philadelphia experiment became one of the most persistent myths in American military history. New versions emerged, along with alleged witnesses and theories linking the case to secret projects such as MK Ultra or even time manipulation programs. Some authors have linked the experiment to the Montauk Project, another alleged secret program that explored time travel, mind control, and parallel dimensions. Proponents of the story claim that the Navy was experimenting with a type of camouflage based on the demagnetization of ships, a real technique known as gaussing, which serves to protect ships from magnetic mines. According to them, this system was taken to the extreme on the Eldridge, using powerful electric generators and Tesla coils to bend light and electromagnetic fields around the ship. This would have produced a phenomenon of invisibility, perhaps even a quantum effect that altered the physical position of the ship. Others point to the work of Nikola Tesla as key to the development of this technology. Tesla is said to have researched ways of manipulating space-time using electric fields, and that some of his discoveries were confiscated by the U.S. government after his death. The experiment, according to this version, would have been a continuation of those secret studies. But beyond the theories, official Navy documents completely deny that the Philadelphia experiment ever took place. They state that the USS Eldridge was in active service during 1943 and was not in Philadelphia on the dates mentioned. Furthermore, there are no records confirming the effects described, nor are there any credible testimonies from sailors who were on board and could corroborate them. Despite these denials, the myth persists. Part of its strength comes from the silence and confusion surrounding many military activities during the war. Secret projects were common, and the lack of official transparency fuels the idea that something may have been hidden. In addition, the story has all the elements that fascinate the imagination: forbidden science, missing persons, hidden powers, effects that seem straight out of a science fiction movie, but with real names, specific dates, and a coherent narrative. Over time, the Philadelphia experiment has inspired books, documentaries, and films. One of the most famous is The Philadelphia Experiment, 1984, which dramatizes the disappearance of the ship and the journey of two sailors into the future. It has also been a recurring theme in television series, novels, and video games, reinforcing its place in popular culture. But beyond the spectacle, the essential question remains. It is possible that in 1943, some kind of manipulation of the electromagnetic field was achieved with unforeseen results. Some physicists point out that although the principles of relativity and electromagnetism allow us to imagine extreme scenarios, the technology necessary to create effects such as total invisibility or space-time jumping was not available at that time. Others are more open-minded and suggest that if anything happened, it was a failed experiment based on an incorrect interpretation of theoretical concepts. And then there is the simplest possibility that it was all an invention, that Carl Allen, the alleged witness, created a story based on speculation and coincidences. He is known to have had a history of mental instability, and his letters to Jess were full of errors, contradictions, and unsubstantiated claims. However, the fact that part of his story coincided with certain real movements of the USS Eldridge with technologies in development at the time makes the story difficult to dismiss entirely. The Philadelphia experiment remains a blurred line between reality and fiction. It is a story that tests our trust in institutions, in official history, and in the limits of science. Perhaps the whole truth will never be known. Perhaps it was just a modern legend. Or perhaps in the classified files of some forgotten department, there still lies the report of an experiment that brushed with the impossible and paid a tragic price. Whatever the case, the mystery remains. Like the echo of a ship that disappeared, returned, and was never the same again. The Curse of the Pharaohs. In 1922, The world was astonished by one of the most important archaeological discoveries of all time, the almost intact tomb of the young pharaoh Tutankhamun, hidden for more than 3,000 years in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. Howard Carter, a British archaeologist, led the expedition that managed to open the tomb after years of searching, financed by the noble Lord Carnarvon. The find was a triumph for archaeology, a unique window into the splendor of ancient Egypt. But soon after, strange things began to happen. Sudden deaths, unexplained illnesses, tragic accidents. Soon a legend was born that would spread around the world. The curse of the pharaohs. The idea was not entirely new. In ancient Egypt, there was a belief that tombs should remain sealed forever and that violating the resting place of a pharaoh would bring misfortune. Some tombs contained inscriptions warning that death would befall anyone who desecrated the sacred place. Although Tutankhamun's tomb did not have an explicit curse inscription, the series of events that followed the discovery was enough to fuel one of the most persistent myths of the 20th century. It all began with the death of Lord Carnarvon, the patron of the expedition. Just a few months after the tomb was opened in April 1923, Carnarvon died suddenly in Cairo after a mosquito bite became infected. It was said that at the exact moment of his death, all the lights in the city went out briefly, and that at his home in England, his dog ran away and fell down dead for no apparent reason. The press at the time, especially British newspapers, seized on the event to fuel the story of an ancient curse. Shortly afterwards, other members involved in the excavation also died in mysterious circumstances. Arthur Mace, an archaeologist who worked closely with Carter, died suddenly in 1928. George Heigold, a financier who visited the tomb, fell ill with fever after the trip and died shortly afterwards. Professor Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist who examined Tutankhamun's mummy, also died shortly after his work. In total, more than a dozen deaths have been linked directly or indirectly to the tomb. Each death further fueled the narrative of the curse. Some died of unexplained infections, others of sudden causes, and there were even violent accidents. The general feeling was that anyone who got too close to the pharaoh's secrets ended up paying the price. It was even said that Carter found a clay figure with a warning engraved on it. Death will touch with its wings those who disturb the pharaoh's sleep. The curious thing is that Howard Carter, the discoverer of the tomb himself, lived many more years. He died in 1939 at the age of 64. Of natural causes. This has led some skeptics to point out that the curse did not come true for everyone. However, others interpret it as an exception that proves the rule or as a sign that Carter did not desecrate the tomb, but rather fulfilled a sacred mission. It is also true that several Egyptologists involved lived many years without any strange incidents, which weakens the theory of a universal curse. But if it wasn't a curse, what caused so many deaths in such a short period of time? Some modern researchers have offered more rational explanations. One suggests that when the tomb was opened, archaeologists may have inhaled fungal spores or bacteria that had developed in the closed environment over millennia. Fungi, such as Aspergillus flavus, have been identified, which can cause deadly respiratory infections, especially in people with weak immune systems. There has also been speculation about the presence of toxic gases, such as ammonia or formaldehyde, released by decomposing organic materials. These could have caused respiratory illnesses or severe allergic reactions. However, these scientific explanations have not completely dispelled the power of the myth. There is something about the narrative of an ancient curse that continues to fascinate. Popular culture was quick to appropriate the mystery. Films, books, and documentaries began to portray the story of the curse as an example of what happens when humans dare to disturb the sacred. The cinema constructed the figure of the vengeful mummy, an ancient being who returns from the afterlife to punish those who violated his tomb. From the 1930s to the present day, the image of the cursed pharaoh has become part of the collective imagination. Even in Egypt, the legend has taken root. Many local workers at ancient excavations spoke with respect and even fear of the tombs. Some refuse to enter certain areas for fear of spiritual consequences. And to this day, when strange events occur in connection with mummy exhibitions or the transfer of pharaonic remains, some Egyptians evoke the curse as an explanation. In 2021, for example, when Egypt organized a grand parade to transfer 22 royal mummies to the new National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, several incidents occurred in the country. A train accident, a collapsed building, and other unfortunate events. On social media, thousands of people began talking about the curse of the pharaohs, as if the ancient kings were upset about the transfer. Although these were coincidences, the power of myth was reactivated. From an anthropological perspective, belief in curses is not new. Ancient cultures, including the Egyptian, conceived of death as a sacred transition and tombs as portals to the afterlife. Protecting them was part of respecting the dead and maintaining cosmic balance. The idea that violating a tomb can bring misfortune is deeply rooted in the collective unconscious. The curse of the pharaohs, therefore, can be understood as a metaphor for the limits that human beings should not cross. It can also be seen as a warning against scientific arrogance. In the 1920s, archaeology still had aspects that were very similar to looting. Many of the pieces discovered were taken to European museums without Egypt's consent. The myth of the curse can be seen as a symbolic way of restoring lost respect, a narrative that reminds us that knowledge has consequences. Today, Tutankhamun's tomb remains one of Egypt's most visited tourist attractions. Its treasures, preserved in the Egyptian Museum and the new Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza, continue to amaze the world. The golden mask of a young pharaoh is one of the most recognizable images of ancient history. And yet, in every corner of that tomb, in every ancient object, the shadow of that story still lingers. The curse that may never have existed or may indeed be reality or myth. The curse of the pharaohs has survived the passage of time because it speaks not only of tombs and death, but also of the profound mystery surrounding Egyptian civilization, of the fascination we feel for what we do not fully understand, and of the eternal fear that by touching the sacred, we may awaken something that should never have been disturbed. The indecipherable code of the Rongo. On the remote island of Easter Island, also known as Rapa Nui, famous for its giant stone statues. Called Moais, there is another mystery just as profound, but much less known. The Rongo writing system engraved on ancient wooden tablets. This code is still one of the great unsolved enigmas of human history. No one has been able to translate it. No one knows for sure how it was read, what it meant, or even if it represents a real writing system. What we do know is that these mysterious inscriptions could hold the oldest secrets of one of the most isolated civilizations on the planet. The story of Rongo begins in the 19th century, when Europeans began to take a serious interest in the culture of Easter Island. It was in 1864 that missionary Eugen Eirod first observed wooden tablets covered with strange inscriptions. According to his account, many local inhabitants kept them in their homes as ancient objects, although no one seemed to understand their meaning. Years later, several examples were sent to museums in Europe and America, where they began to attract the attention of linguists, ethnographers, and archaeologists. The most fascinating thing about Rongo is its visual appearance. Each tablet contains rows of small carved signs arranged in horizontal lines that are read in a peculiar direction called reverse boustrophedon. One line is read from left to right, the next from right to left, and so on, with the characters rotated to suit the reading direction. It is an extremely rare and highly sophisticated style, suggesting a complex tradition behind its creation. The symbols themselves are meticulous and stylized, representing human figures, animals, plants, and geometric shapes. Many signs are anthropomorphic, figures with arms, legs, hands, heads with headdresses, or specific gestures. Others resemble birds, fish, tools, or natural elements. More than 120 different signs have been identified, suggesting that this is not simply decorative art, but a form of encoding ideas, sounds, or concepts. But the real mystery begins when we try to understand what these tablets say. To this day, no one has been able to decipher their content with certainty. Unlike other ancient writing systems, such as Egyptian hieroglyphics or cuneiform writing, there are no bilingual texts, translations, or any known equivalents that could serve as a key. The spoken language of the modern Rapanui has evolved, and oral knowledge of the meaning of Rongo disappeared long ago, possibly after the social and demographic crises suffered by the island. During the 16th and 19th centuries, the Rapanui population was devastated by diseases brought by Europeans, slavery, internal tribal wars, and ecological collapse caused by overexploitation of resources. Many traditions were lost, including the rituals, songs, and mythologies associated with Rongo. When anthropologists attempted to investigate, it was too late. No one was left alive who could read or interpret these signs. Some attempts at translation have suggested that the tablets could contain genealogies, ceremonial songs, crop records, mythical tales, or even a lunar calendar. Other researchers have proposed that it was a mnemonic system, an aid to remembering sacred songs that were transmitted orally rather than a complete writing system. But these are all hypotheses. In the absence of a key to reading it, Rongo remains a silent language. Only about 26 authentic tablets survive in the world, scattered among museums and private collections. Many of them are damaged, burned, eroded, or incomplete. Some are carved from toro moro or puka wood, native trees that are now extinct on the island. What we have are fragments of an incomplete code, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle with the picture missing. This has led some to question whether Rongo was truly a complete writing system. Some linguists have suggested that it did not encode a phonetic language, but was instead a series of ideographic symbols like the ancient systems of China or Mesoamerica. Others doubt that it was a real writing system and propose that it was a late invention, perhaps influenced by contact with Europeans and their books. According to this idea, the inhabitants of Rapanui would have tried to imitate writing without fully understanding it. However, this hypothesis clashes with the level of complexity shown by the tablets. The number of signs, their orderly arrangement, and the repetition of internal patterns suggest that there were clear rules, a logical structure, and meaningful content. If it was a spontaneous invention, it is one of the most impressive ever recorded in an isolated culture. Some researchers have attempted to find statistical patterns, analyze symbol frequencies, and study repetitions. Correspondences have been proposed with the Rapanui language, with Polynesian in general, or even with more distant languages, but without a Rosetta Stone, every proposal is met with uncertainty. Others have linked Rongo to the Birdman culture, a ceremonial rite that was practiced on the island until the 19th century. This ritual, which combined religious, political, and sporting elements, included the election of a spiritual leader through a dangerous competition. Some signs on the tablets resemble birds, eggs, and human figures, leading to speculation that the code could be connected to the mythology of that tradition. There are also more daring theories. Some have linked Rongo to astronomical knowledge, even to global prehistoric knowledge. It has been suggested that the tablets could hold information about the cycles of the sun, moon, stars, and eclipses. This idea stems from the fact that many isolated ancient cultures, such as the Maya and the Druids, developed complex astronomical systems. Could Rongo be the remnant of a lost science in the middle of the Pacific? There are even proposals that border on the fantastic. Some theorists have linked the code to lost civilizations, such as Lemuria or Mu and pre-Columbian transoceanic contacts. Although these ideas lack solid archaeological evidence, they demonstrate how the enigma of the Rongo has captured the imagination of many beyond the academic realm. Today, interest in this system has not disappeared. There are multidisciplinary projects that combine artificial intelligence, linguistics, computer science, and archaeology to try new methods of deciphering it. However, they all agree on one thing: Without new discoveries, without more tablets or additional context, the Rongorongo Code will remain a silent voice, but even in its silence it speaks. It reminds us that human knowledge can be lost, that civilizations, even the smallest and most remote, can develop complex systems of thought, and that a catastrophe, an epidemic, an invasion, or a social crisis can wipe out millennia of history in a single generation. The Rongorongo is more than a system of signs. It is a warning, a promise, a story frozen inward waiting for someone to read it. And perhaps one day, a new tablet will be discovered, a parallel text, a translation, a clue. Perhaps then what is today a wall of incomprehensible symbols will become the voice of an ancient people who still have something to say. Until then, the tablets will continue to rest in display cases, silent, like the echo of a civilization that once spoke, but we no longer remember how to listen to it. The Iron Mask. In the darkest corners of French history lies a mystery that has baffled generations. That of the prisoner known as the Man in the Iron Mask. Arrested in the second half of the 10th century, this enigmatic character spent decades locked up in various prisons under strict surveillance, hiding his face behind a mask that, according to some versions, was made of iron and, according to others, of black velvet reinforced with metal pieces. His name was never known, and he was never allowed to speak freely. No one, except his jailers and a few high-ranking officials, knew who he really was. The only thing that is clear is that he really existed, documented by official records, and that his identity remains an unsolved mystery to this day. The case first came to light thanks to Voltaire. The famous philosopher, who spent some time in prison in the Bastille, heard from the guards the story of a high-profile prisoner who had been imprisoned for years without trial, without explanation, and always with his face covered. Voltaire popularized the idea that the mask was made of iron and that the man was hiding a secret so profound that its revelation would endanger the entire kingdom. Since then, the story has become legendary, the subject of novels, films, and conspiracy theories. But beyond the myth, there are historical facts. The prisoner really existed and was transferred between several important prisons in the Kingdom of France, including the famous Bastille. His custody was assigned to Benign d'Auburn de Saint-Mars, a royal officer who accompanied him from prison to prison for more than 3 decades, which is unusual in itself. Documents show that this prisoner was treated with a certain deference. He had a private cell, clean clothes, decent furniture, and good food. He was no ordinary prisoner, but he was not allowed contact with others, nor was he authorized to reveal his identity. His death is officially recorded on November 19, 1703, under the false name of Marchiali or Marchiali, and he was buried in the St. Paul Cemetery in Paris. Even his grave was erased over time, as if the intention had been to eliminate all traces of his existence. Who was this man? Why so much secrecy? And what information could justify such a long and carefully hidden punishment? Theories abound, each more intriguing than the last. One of the most popular is that the Man in the Iron Mask was the twin brother of Louis XIV, the Sun King. According to this version, the birth of 2 identical sons would have posed a threat to the stability of the kingdom, as there would have been 2 legitimate heirs. To avoid a struggle for the throne, one of them would have been hidden from birth. This theory was taken up by Alexandre Dumas in his novel The Viscount of Bragelonne, where he describes the prisoner as Philip, the king's twin. Although there is no historical evidence to support it, the idea has narrative power and has profoundly influenced the popular image of the character. Another theory suggests that he was a nobleman involved in political conspiracies against the crown. Some mention Eustache d'Ager, a trusted servant who is said to have known compromising secrets about the nobility or even the monarch himself. This theory is one of the most widely accepted by historians, as there are records of certain Eustache d'Ager being arrested in 1669 on the direct orders of Minister Lowboys and sent to prison under exceptional conditions, such as wearing a mask when in the presence of other people. It has also been suggested that the prisoner was the Duke of Beaufort, an influential member of the royal family who disappeared in confusing circumstances during a naval expedition. Another hypothesis points to the Count of Vermandois, Louis XIV's illegitimate son with the Marquise de la Belair, who is said to have committed some act that dishonored the king and was therefore condemned to oblivion. There are even those who believe that the prisoner was someone much less noble, but with extremely sensitive information. For example, a doctor or pharmacist involved in poisoning scandals, such as those surrounding the case of the Marquise de Brinvilliers and the famous Aftes poisons, a scandal of witchcraft and murder by poison that shook the court of Louis XIV. All these theories have in common the idea that the prisoner knew a secret so important, so potentially dangerous to the state, that he had to be silenced forever. Not executed, which would have made him a martyr or aroused suspicion, not tried, which would have made him visible, but imprisoned in darkness, forgotten, erased from history. One of the most disturbing elements is the level of attention his custody received. St. Mars, his jailer, was transferred from prison to prison along with the prisoner, an unprecedented measure. Every cell where the mysterious man was held was carefully prepared. He was never allowed to speak to anyone. Even the soldiers who brought him food had instructions to kill him if he tried to speak. Any writing that left his cell was confiscated. His name, his face, his words, everything was suppressed. The circumstances of his death and burial reinforced the mystery. His grave was registered under a false name, and the death certificate was written in a different handwriting than usual. No one was allowed access to the body or his belongings. Voltaire himself, decades later, wondered why the state would have gone to such lengths to hide a person if he was not someone of great importance. Over time, the myth grew. Hundreds of pages were written trying to unmask the man behind a mask. Each generation added details, reinterpreted documents, discovered new clues, or discarded old theories. However, to this day, no definitive proof has been found to confirm his identity. The story of the man in the iron mask is one of the most symbolic of absolute power. It represents the lengths to which a regime will go to protect its secrets. A person condemned not for what he did, but for what he knew. An existence erased to preserve an image, a myth, a crown, is also a deeply human story. Who was this man? What did he think as the years passed in dark cells? Did he hold out hope? Did he resign himself to his fate? Was he innocent, guilty, a traitor, or simply a victim? Did he think that one day someone would tell his story? Or did he die knowing that his face would never be remembered? Today, fragments of his file are still preserved in French archives. Some have been opened, others remain classified or lost. Perhaps the truth is they're waiting to be rediscovered. Or perhaps the identity of the man behind the iron mask is destined to remain hidden forever as part of that other history that is never written in ink, but in silence. A man without a name, without a face, without a public history, but with a presence that has endured for centuries. The embodiment of a secret so great that it was literally locked away behind a mask. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart was much more than a pilot. She was a pioneer, a symbol of courage and freedom at a time when the world was still learning to fly and women were fighting to make their way in male-dominated fields. Her life was a constant race against social expectations, physical limits, and ultimately against time and mystery. Her disappearance in 1937 during an ambitious attempt to circumnavigate the globe along the equator not only left the world baffled, but also marked the beginning of one of the most persistent enigmas of the 20th century. Amelia Mary Earhart was born in 1897 in Kansas, United States. From a young age, she showed an independent character and an adventurous spirit. At a time when women were assigned very restricted roles, Amelia had no qualms about challenging norms. She studied mechanics, was interested in airplanes, and refused to accept a traditional destiny. She began flying in the 1920s and quickly became a prominent figure in aviation. In 1932, she made history by becoming the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. Her name became synonymous with courage, progress, and modernity, but her ambition knew no bounds. In 1937, Earhart announced that she would attempt to fly around the world along the equator, a longer and more complex route than any previous attempt. She would do so in a twin-engine Electra 10 aircraft, accompanied by Fred Noonan, an expert navigator. It was a technical and physical challenge that required precision, endurance, and a great deal of planning. They departed from Oakland, California, and began their journey eastward, making stops in South America, Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and finally Australia. By the time they reached Papua New Guinea, they had already traveled more than 35,000 kilometers. Only 11,000 kilometers remained to complete the feat. Their next destination was a small island called Howe, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where they would refuel before continuing onward. On July 2, 1937, Amelia and Fred took off from at noon bound for Howe Island. The stretch was more than 4,000 kilometers over open sea, with no intermediate landing points. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed at Hind to facilitate radio communications and guide them to the island, but something went wrong. As the hours passed, communications between the plane and the Itasca became confused. Amelia reported that she could not locate the island, that the fuel was running low, and that she was trying to communicate on different frequencies. The signals were weak, sometimes inaudible. At 8:43 a.m., Amelia transmitted her last message. "We are on line 157 at 337. We will follow this line until we find you." And then silence. They never made it to Howe. The plane disappeared without a trace. Not a single piece of the LCID Electra was found, nor any human remains or emergency signals. The U.S. government launched one of the most intensive searches in history, with ships, planes, and submarines scouring thousands of miles of ocean. But it was all in vain. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan vanished into thin air as if they had been swallowed by the Pacific Ocean itself. Since then, multiple theories have emerged to explain what happened. The most widely accepted is that the plane crashed due to fuel exhaustion, that it became disoriented and, without enough fuel, fell into the sea and sank quickly, leaving no floating debris. This hypothesis is consistent with the radio messages and the difficulty of locating Howe, an island only 2 kilometers long in the middle of the vast ocean. Another theory suggests that Amelia and Fred, unable to find Howe, continued flying until they reached another Pacific island, such as Garner Island, now known as Nikumaroro, part of the Kiribati archipelago. This hypothesis has gained strength in recent decades. Remains of objects that could be of Western origin from the 1930s have been found on Nikumaroro, fragments of an airplane, tools, buttons, and bones. Skeletal remains were even found in 1940, which at the time were dismissed as male, but modern studies believe they could have belonged to a woman of similar build to Amelia. Law Organization TIRE, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, Holiterato Numerosis Expeditions, and Nico Mororo, based on maps, old testimonies, and forensic analysis, have developed the theory that Amelia and Fred made an emergency landing on the reefs of the island and survived for days or weeks before dying from lack of water or food. Although there is no definitive proof, this is one of the most detailed hypotheses supported by physical evidence. However, there are more controversial theories. Some believe that Amelia was captured by Japanese forces after landing on a Japanese-controlled Pacific island, such as Saipan or the Marshall Islands. According to this theory, the Japanese would have considered the aviators to be spies and interrogated or executed them. This version was fueled by alleged photos, oral testimonies, and documents that, however, lack verification. In 2017, a photograph declassified by the U.S. government appeared to show Amelia and Fred in a Japanese port, but it was later proven that the image was from before 1937. Conspiracy theories have also emerged that Amelia was recruited by the U.S. government for a secret espionage mission, and that after its failure, she was given a new identity to live in anonymity. In this account, She would have lived as an ordinary citizen in the United States until her death. Although intriguing, there is no concrete evidence to support this possibility. The truth is that Amelia Earhart's disappearance has transcended the realm of history to become a myth. She is remembered not only for her disappearance, but for everything she represented as a woman in a man's world, facing the open sky with courage, intelligence, and determination. Her image in her flight suit, her short hair blowing in the wind, and her determined eyes became an icon of female independence and exploration. In the decades that followed, Amelia has been the subject of biographies, novels, films, songs, and tributes. In the United States, her name appears in schools, airports, parks, and streets. NASA has named one of its space waves in her honor, and every time someone disappears in the ocean without explanation, her case is remembered. Modern aviation has advanced exponentially since those days, but the disappearance of Amelia Earhart reminds us that the sky and the sea still hold secrets. It reminds us how fragile we are in the face of the vastness of the world, and how courage can take us far, even beyond what history can reach. Perhaps one day the exact whereabouts of the plane will be discovered. Maybe a fisherman will find a piece of the fuselage, or an underwater expedition will find the wreckage at the bottom of the Pacific. But Vesno, perhaps its fate is doomed to remain part of the myth that she herself helped to create. Amelia Earhart was a woman who dreamed beyond limits. And although her final journey ended in mystery, her legacy continues to fly high among the clouds of the possible and the unknown. The underground city of Derinkuyu, deep in the Cappadocia region of central Turkey, lies one of the greatest architectural mysteries of the ancient world, the underground city of Derinkuyu. This marvel is not built on the ground, but inside it, excavated directly from the soft volcanic rock of the area. It is not just a few connected caves, but a veritable underground urban complex with several floors descending to a depth of more than 80 m, with rooms, tunnels, corridors, kitchens, storerooms, cellars, churches, water wells, ventilation systems, and even stables for animals. All this was done, according to the evidence, without modern tools, and whose exact construction remains unexplained. The discovery of Derinkuyu in modern times happened by accident. In 1963, a local resident, while renovating a wall in his house, knocked down a stone wall and found a hidden room behind it. Intrigued, he continued exploring and found a tunnel leading to more rooms, passageways, and chambers. What at first appeared to be a simple cellar turned out to be the entrance to a vast and complex underground world that had remained hidden for centuries. Thus, Derinkuyu was rediscovered, a city buried underground that in its heyday may have been home to more than 20,000 people. But who built this city and why? And above all, how did they do it without excavators, machinery, or artificial lighting? The volcanic rock in the region is soft and easy to carve, which allowed it to be excavated with simple tools such as metal chisels. However, the planning, scale, and complexity of Derinkuyu go far beyond what one would expect from a rudimentary excavation. This is not a haphazard collection of tunnels, but an organized system with well-defined spaces and specific functions. The first level contained stables and warehouses where animals and essential supplies were kept. The lower floors housed dwellings, kitchens, cellars, communal rooms, religious schools, and even a cross-shaped church. A system of wells drew water from underground aquifers, while dozens of ventilation ducts hidden from view from the surface allowed air to circulate throughout all levels. Huge round stones served as movable doors. They could be closed from the inside to protect the tunnels in case of attack, functioning as true defensive gates. The existence of these underground cities, Derinkuyu is not the only one, but the largest of dozens in the region, has raised many questions. Historians believe that their origin dates back to the Hittite period around the 15th century BC, although some scholars suggest that the first excavations could be even earlier. Later, during the Byzantine Empire, these cities were expanded and used as a refuge from Arab invasions and other threats. The Christian population of the area hid there for months, without needing to come to the surface, in a kind of underground fortress city. During times of greatest persecution, these cities were key to survival. They had grain stores, wine and oil presses, rudimentary latrines, and even burial areas. Some chambers were acoustically isolated, and others were used for religious rituals. The stone doors were so heavy that it took several people to open them, and many of the galleries were so narrow that only one person could pass through at a time, which helped to control invaders. One of the great mysteries is how they managed to maintain such a large structure without it collapsing. The deepest floors are more than 60 meters underground, yet there are no signs of subsidence or structural failure. This implies an advanced knowledge of architecture and geology. The planning must have been extremely precise to prevent the upper layers from collapsing when the lower levels were excavated. In addition, the ventilation system is so sophisticated that it still works today. It is estimated that there are more than 50 ducts running through the city, vertically, allowing for constant air circulation, even on the lowest levels. Some of these ducts also served as water wells, while others were exclusively for air. This is remarkable engineering for a society without electricity or motors. Another amazing aspect is the interconnection. Derinkuyu is connected by underground tunnels to other nearby cities, such as Kaimakli, about 10 kilometers away. These passages were used to move between communities underground in case of attacks on the surface. It is estimated that there are more than 200 smaller underground cities scattered throughout the region, many of which remain unexplored. There is no shortage of alternative theories, of course. Some researchers have suggested that these cities were not built as temporary shelters, but as permanent habitats designed to survive natural or even climatic catastrophes. It has been proposed that Derinkuyu may have been a kind of underground ark to escape an extreme climatic disaster, such as an ice age. Others go even further, proposing older origins that challenge the official chronology, linking them to lost civilizations or even theories of extraterrestrial contact, due to the apparent impossibility of constructing these buildings with the technology of the time. But without going that far, what is clear is that Derinkuyu represents a remarkable degree of human sophistication. It is testimony to a civilization that knew how to adapt to its environment in ways that still surprise us today, that in the face of danger, climate, or war, found a creative and lasting solution, building down. Today, part of Derinkuyu is open to the public and can be visited, although only a fraction of its levels are accessible for safety reasons. Walking through its dark corridors, seeing the hidden chambers and the stones blocking the entrances is like entering a parallel universe. The silence underground, the dampness of the rock, the narrowness of the passages, all transport us to a time when survival required ingenuity, cooperation, and faith. And yet, no matter how much we explore it, Derinkuyu remains a mystery. We don't know how many people actually live there. We don't know how many more levels might exist below. We don't know what motivated its original construction. We only have its silent presence, buried under layers of earth and centuries of history. The underground city of Derinkuyu is not just an archaeological oddity. It is a lesson in humility. It reminds us that even though we think we know everything about the past, there are still secrets beneath our feet. Secrets carved in stone, protected by time, waiting to be understood. Derinkuyu is one of those secrets, a city without a sky, but full of history. The crystal skulls. Among the most mysterious and controversial objects to emerge in the modern history of archaeology are the crystal skulls. These pieces, made of transparent or milky quartz, reproduce the shape of the human skull in astonishing detail. According to some, they come from ancient civilizations such as the Maya, the Aztecs, or even older and unknown cultures. What has fascinated the world is not only their realistic appearance, but the extraordinary precision with which they are carved, supposedly without the use of modern tools. Some of these skulls appear to have been polished against the natural structure of the quartz, something that even today's equipment could not easily achieve without damaging the material. This level of sophistication has fueled not only amazement, but also dozens of theories, ranging from extraterrestrial origins to supernatural powers and lost knowledge. The most famous of all is the so-called Michigan skull. It was made famous by British explorer Frederick Michigan, who claimed that it was discovered in 1924 by his adopted daughter Anna while exploring the ruins of a temple in Lebantu, an ancient Mayan city in Velice. The skull, made of transparent quartz crystal, had a movable jaw, something unique among others, and was polished to such perfection that it reflected light in a hypnotic way. Meghjas claimed that the Mayans used it for rituals and that it was a sacred object capable of killing with just the thought of the victim. This legend helped turn the skull into a kind of cursed totem, which only increased its fame. However, the skull's true origin has been questioned from the beginning. Archives reveal that Michi's bought it at an auction in Sotheby's in 1943, which contradicts the story of its archaeological discovery. Even so, this contradiction did not stop the wave of public interest. The skull was examined by the Hewlett-Packard Institute in the 1970s, and the results were surprising. There were no visible marks from metal tools, indicating that it could have been sculpted without the use of modern technology. It was also said that the quartz was of the piezoelectric type, the same as that used in watches and electronic equipment, which gave rise to new theories about its possible energetic or mystical properties. There are at least a dozen similar skulls scattered throughout museums and private collections around the world. Some are in the British Museum, the Musée White Branly in Paris, and the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. All share a similar aesthetic, although some are rougher or less detailed. Many were acquired in the 19th or early 20th centuries, at a time when archaeological collecting was booming and less evidence was required to prove the authenticity or origin of objects. One of the great mysteries is how these skulls could have been carved, if they really come from Mesoamerican cultures that did not have metal tools, magnifying glasses, or precision machinery. Quartz is an extremely hard mineral. On the Mohs scale, it has a hardness of 7 out of 10, and carving it requires extreme control to prevent it from fracturing. Furthermore, in the case of the Michi and Ijes skull, the crystal belongs to the same block, including the separate jaw, which implies impressive technical skill. Defenders of its authenticity propose that ancient craftsmen used unknown or long-forgotten methods, such as abrasion with sand, water, and time, decades of manual labor, rubbing the stone slowly until the desired shape was achieved. Others go further and suggest that these pieces were inherited from much more advanced civilizations lost in time, such as Atlantis. There are even those who claim that the skulls were not made by humans at all, but come from beings from other worlds who shared knowledge with ancient civilizations. Of course, the scientific community remains skeptical. Studies conducted with electron microscopes by the British Museum and the Smithsonian revealed marks from rotating tools similar to those left by modern grinding wheels. This indicates that many skulls, including the famous one at the Smithsonian, were made in Europe in the 19th century during the heyday of occultism and interest in pre-Columbian cultures. German craftsmen of that era were experts in glass carving, and there are documents linking the sale of quartz skulls to French and English merchants during that period. Even so, these conclusions do not completely discredit the mystery. Some skulls, such as those of Michi and Ijes, still do not fit entirely into this narrative. Although it is argued that they were made with modern tools, there is no conclusive evidence. Moreover, their cultural influence has transcended the need to verify their authenticity. Film, literature, and video games have adopted the image of crystal skulls as symbols of power, ancient wisdom, or mystical danger. From movies such as Indiana Jones to documentaries on channels such as the History Channel, the idea that these skulls could hold secrets of the universe has captured the popular imagination. Some spiritual groups even consider them sacred relics, capable of amplifying human consciousness, channeling energy, or activating ancient memories. There are myths that speak of 13 original skulls, each with unique knowledge or power, and that only when they are reunited will they reveal the truth about the history of humanity. This idea has no historical or archaeological basis, but it has become part of modern myth. As with many enigmas, the lack of firm evidence does not eliminate the fascination, but rather fuels it. The aura surrounding the crystal skulls also reflects an ongoing tension between science and belief, between the tangible and the mythical. On the one hand, we have scientific precision instruments that analyze the markings, age, and composition of the quartz. On the other hand, there is the almost magnetic attraction of these objects, the feeling that there is something we do not understand, something that eludes us. The debate remains open. Are these skulls elaborate fakes made by 19th century European craftsmen? Or are they genuine fragments of knowledge lost beyond what we think we know about ancient cultures? What is certain is that their existence forces us to take a closer look at the narratives we take for granted. They remind us that history is made up not only of proven facts, but also of gaps, unanswered questions, and mysteries that defy logic. And perhaps that is the most important thing, because regardless of their origin, age, or method of manufacture, glass skulls continue to serve an essential function. They make us question. They force us to look more closely, to investigate more deeply, and to accept that the past, like the quartz from which they are made, may seem clear at first glance, but hides within itself reflections, fractures, and secrets that we have not yet managed to decipher. The Chernobyl fire and its mutations. In the early hours of April 26, 1986, an explosion rocked Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the then Soviet Union. Today, Ukraine, what seemed like an isolated accident, became the worst civilian nuclear disaster in history. For days, tons of radioactive material were thrown into the air, spreading across Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and much of Europe. But the most disturbing thing was not only the immediate destruction or the evacuation of entire cities, but what was left behind, an exclusion zone of more than 2,600 square kilometers contaminated with radiation, where life was abruptly interrupted. Or so it was thought. Almost 40 years after the disaster, Chernobyl continues to harbor biological enigmas, especially genetic mutations that scientists still cannot fully explain. From the outset, the priority was to contain the disaster. A sarcophagus was built over the destroyed reactor. The city of Pripyat was evacuated and thousands of people, firefighters, workers, and soldiers were sent to clean up the area, many without adequate protection. Most suffered devastating effect from radiation, but once humans left, something unexpected happened. Nature began to return. In the years that followed, researchers began to notice that the exclusion zone was not as deserted as expected. Wild animals, plants, and even fungi returned to occupy the contaminated territory. European wolves, brown bears, moose, lynxes, and hundreds of bird species began to settle in what was once an industrial city. How was it possible that such a radioactive area, with levels thousands of times higher than normal, could sustain life? This is where the genetic mysteries begin. Numerous studies have shown that organisms living in Chernobyl have mutations. In many cases, these are subtle. Changes in the length of certain birds' wings, alterations in the fur of mammals, modifications in reproduction rates. But in other cases, the mutations are more obvious. For example, some bird species have smaller brains, singing defects, or bone malformations. Some frogs show unusually dark pigmentation, which some scientists believe could be an adaptation to radiation as a natural shield. In fact, darker frogs have been found to survive better in the most contaminated areas, suggesting accelerated evolution in response to extreme conditions. However, the most surprising case came in 2016, when a group of scientists detected fungi growing inside the destroyed reactor. These fungi not only survived extreme levels of radiation, but also appeared to feed on it. They contained melanin, the same pigment that darkens human skin, but in this case, it seemed to absorb radiation and transform it into chemical energy, something that had never been seen before. This discovery opened up a new field in biology, the possibility of radiotrophic organisms capable of using radiation as an energy source, just as plants do with sunlight. These fungi have even been sent to the International Space Station to see if they could protect astronauts from cosmic radiation. Returning to animals, one of the best-known examples is that of the Chernobyl swallows. These birds exhibit a number of mutations: abnormal plumage, asymmetrical tails, leucism spots, loss of pigmentation, and higher rates of cataracts. Many of these mutations are associated with DNA damage caused by constant exposure to ionizing radiation. Despite this, the birds continue to reproduce and, in some cases, have developed mechanisms to repair DNA more quickly than other species. In mammals, the results are more contradictory. Some studies indicate that species such as field mice show cumulative genetic damage, reduced fertility, and a higher incidence of tumors. However, other studies, especially in wolves, wild boars, and wild horses, show healthy populations. This apparent contrast has led to an intriguing theory. Natural selection acts more intensely in extreme environments such as Chernobyl, meaning that only individuals with favorable or radiation-resistant mutations survive and reproduce, accelerating the evolutionary process. What is happening in the exclusion zone is a kind of natural laboratory, a large-scale experiment that no human could have designed, either ethically or technically. Scientists are taking advantage of this unique environment to study how life behaves under extreme conditions and how DNA responds to massive stress. What they find does not always fit with predictions. There are organisms that thrive, others that disappear, and many that adapt in ways not yet fully understood. Beyond animals, plants have also shown mutations. Trees with twisted trunks, deformed leaves, changes in flowering. A well-known case is the red forest, an area near the reactor where the radiation was so intense that the trees literally died within hours, turning reddish before collapsing. Decades later, new plants have begun to grow there, but they show altered genetic patterns. However, many plant species seem to have developed tolerance to radiation and now cover much of the area, demonstrating the resilience of nature. There is also the human factor. Although the area remains officially uninhabited, there are self-returnees, mostly elderly people who return to live in their homes after the accident and have remained there for decades. Medical studies of these individuals have shown surprising results. While the incidence of certain cancers is higher, many live long lives with no apparent serious effects. This raises an uncomfortable question. Is it possible that the human body can also partially adapt to radioactive environments over time? Of course, not all adaptations are miraculous. The Chernobyl disaster left a dark legacy. Thousands of people died from radiation-related cancers, especially thyroid cancer, due to the release of iodine-131. The rate of congenital diseases in generations born in the affected areas also increased. Workers who participated in the cleanup, called liquidators, were exposed to lethal doses without adequate protection, and many died shortly thereafter. The human tragedy was immense and should not be minimized when discussing biological mutations. But the truth is that in the midst of the disaster, Chernobyl became an unexpected symbol of regeneration. Today, it is the subject of documentaries, novels, video games, and even tourism. People from all over the world travel to the exclusion zone to see with their own eyes what the disaster left behind. Buildings frozen in time, toys on the floors of abandoned schools, hospitals covered in dust, and amid it all, wildlife roaming freely as if nature had reclaimed what humans destroyed. Scientists continue to study the area, partly because Chernobyl represents a unique opportunity to understand the long-term effects of radiation on complex systems, but also because the mutations observed there could reveal clues for other areas of science, such as repairing damaged DNA, surviving in space, and designing organisms that can withstand extreme environments. Above all, Chernobyl raises a fundamental question. How far can life go to adapt? Where are the limits of evolution? The answer may lie among the twisted trees, the glowing wolves, and the dark fungi that grow, where nothing else should survive. The area remains dangerous, but it is also deeply revealing. Chernobyl has become more than an accident. It has become a mirror of what we are capable of creating and what life is capable of enduring. The man in the lead mask. On August 20th, 1966, in the city of Niterói, Brazil, two children playing on a hill known as Morro de Ventum made a chilling discovery. The lifeless bodies of two men lay side by side, carefully placed among the vegetation. Both were dressed in formal suits, long raincoats, and most disconcertingly, each wore a lead mask covering his face, similar to those used to protect against radiation. Even stranger objects were found beside them. An empty water bottle, two towels, a notebook with cryptic notes, and no visible signs of violence, wounds, or struggle. Thus began one of the most enigmatic cases in Brazilian criminal history, known as the mystery of the man in the lead mask. The victims were identified as Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana, two electronics technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes, a city about 300 kilometers from where they were found. Both men were known for their technical expertise and interest in esoteric and spiritual subjects. They worked together repairing radios and televisions, but they were also part of a group interested in spiritualism, psychic experimentation, and paranormal phenomena. It was said that they used to meet with other colleagues to try to contact spirits, study invisible energies, and experiment with electromagnetic fields. Investigators soon discovered that the men had left Campos dos Goitacazes 2 days before they were found, on August 17th. They told their families that they were going to buy electronic equipment. They took a bus to Niterói and during the trip bought raincoats, a bottle of water, and a notebook. Witnesses stated that they seemed nervous, that they were constantly consulting a piece of paper, and that asked for directions to Morro do Ventum, a remote place with no traffic or buildings. They had no luggage or food, only the bare essentials. Something seemed to be guiding them with a clear purpose. What baffled the authorities most was the note found in their notebook. It read, "For 30B at the designated place. 6:30 ingest capsules. Then protect the metals. Wait for signal for mask." It was like step-by-step instructions for some kind of ritual or procedure. The reference to ingesting capsules led to speculation that they had taken some kind of drug or substance before they died. Although autopsies could not confirm this, the bodies were too decomposed from the heat and exposure to the open air. We found astralis and venenu, clear chemical substances. The cause of death remains undetermined to this day. The lead masks also caused confusion. They had no straps or fastenings. They were rigid, opaque pieces molded to fit over the eyes. They were not designed to allow vision, but to completely block it. They were also not typical of any type of industrial protection. Some theorists suggested that they were improvised devices to protect against intense light or radiation. But what kind of light were they expecting to see? What kind of event required such preparation? Soon, a wide variety of theories emerged. One of the most widespread is that the two men were trying to contact beings from another plane, extraterrestrials, interdimensional entities, or spirits. The note, the masks, and the choice of a remote location fit with an attempt at a mystical encounter or experience. Some witnesses claim to have seen bright lights in the sky above the Cape on the night of their deaths, fueling speculation about a possible failed abduction or experiment gone wrong. Others proposed a more down-to-earth theory, fraud, or a dangerous prank. Perhaps a third party had given them the capsules with false promises of energy or spiritual revelation. There's also talk of a secret sect to which they belonged, where rituals involving drugs and mind experiments were practiced, but no direct evidence was found to indicate that the men were forced or deceived. Everything indicated that they acted of their own free will. The most disturbing thing is that this was not an isolated case. In the following years, other reports of mysterious deaths appeared in Brazil with similar characteristics. Bodies found in remote locations, carefully positioned, with cryptic notes, or signs of rituals. None were solved. Some investigators believe that these cases could be connected to a network of occult groups operating in the country during the 1960s and 1970s, a period marked by political repression, fear of the unknown, and a fascination with the mystical. One of the most curious details is that Miguel and Manuel had attempted this experiment before. A relative stated that weeks earlier, the men had tried to climb another hill with the intention of carrying out a spiritual experience involving an intense light source. They did not succeed for unknown reasons. This second time, it seems they did, but they paid the price with their lives. What is puzzling about the case is not only the lack of answers, but the apparent coherence of their actions. They bought what they needed, followed a plan, climbed the hill, lay down side by side, put on the masks, and waited for something. There are no signs of struggle, distress, or even flight. They died as if they were at peace, convinced that they were doing something important. But what did they expect to see? What was the signal mentioned in the note? And why protect the metals? Were they afraid of being affected by some kind of radiation or magnetic field? The case was officially closed as death by unknown causes. The lack of conclusive evidence, the decomposition of the bodies, and the absence of direct witnesses made any definitive resolution impossible. Over the years, the mystery of the man in the mask became an urban legend, fueling books, movies, and paranormal theories. But for Miguel and Manuel's relatives, the questions were never answered. Did they take their own lives? Did they die accidentally during an experiment? Were they victims of something bigger? Today, the case continues to fascinate because of its strangeness. This is not a story of passion, revenge, or robbery. It is something different, something that defies simple explanations. An enigma where science, faith, madness, and mystery intertwine. The lead masks remain the perfect symbol, an attempt to protect themselves from a light that perhaps only existed in their minds, or perhaps not. Morro do Bentham is still there, silent, covered with trees and fog on humid days. People still visit it, some out of curiosity, others out of devotion, because although the answers remain hidden, the case of the man in the lead mask reminds us of something essential. That sometimes the greatest mysteries are not in what we see, but in what we believe we see, in silent rituals, in inexplicable decisions, in stories that don't quite add up. And until we understand why two men climbed a hill with the intention of seeing something beyond this world, the mystery will live on. The San Telmo fires. For centuries, sailors and navigators around the world have told stories of mysterious lights appearing on the massive ships during storms. These lights, blue or violet in color, seem to dance gently on the tips of sails, masts, crosses, or any elevated surface. They did not burn or smolder, but emitted a supernatural glow in the darkness. Many saw it as a divine sign, a heavenly apparition protecting sailors from certain death. These lights were named the Fires of San Telmo in honor of Erasmus of Formia, the patron saint of sailors. This phenomenon has been observed since ancient times. Greek and Roman sailors already spoke of lights on ships during storms, but it was medieval sailors who gave them a sacred character. It was said that when the Fires of San Telmo appeared, it meant that the ship would survive the storm. It was a blessing from heaven, a warning that danger was present, but not definitive. In an era when the sea was a relentless and often fatal place, any sign was interpreted as a divine message. Religion mixed with physics, and the inexplicable became sacred. But what are San Telmo fires? Really? Why do they occur? And above all, why have they been so difficult to explain even in the modern era? From a scientific point of view, San Telmo fires are an electrical phenomenon known as corona discharge. They occur when the electric field in an area is so intense that the surrounding air becomes ionized, i.e., it becomes conductive. This produces a small discharge that emits visible light, usually blue or violet in color. This type of discharge does not produce intense heat or cause damage, which is why it can settle on a mast without burning it. It is similar to how neon tubes or neon signs work. Electricity passing through a gas causes luminescence. The phenomenon usually occurs during thunderstorms when the atmosphere is charged with electricity and pointed objects, such as antennas, crosses, masts, or even the nose of an airplane, act as natural emitters of these discharges. On wooden ships, with metal structures at the top, the effect was very visible. At night, on the high seas, with no light other than lightning and the stars, this ghostly glow could seem like the manifestation of something supernatural. In ancient times, it was interpreted as the presence of spirits, angels, or divine signs. Sometimes it was associated with warnings. If the lights appeared before a storm, it was a sign of imminent danger. If they appeared after a gust of wind, they were believed to calm the fury of the sea. On some ships, prayers were said when these lights were seen, thanking the saint for his protection. On others, they were taken as omens, good or bad, depending on the context. This ambiguity made them even more mysterious. The name Sant'Elmo comes from Erasmus of Formia, a bishop and Christian martyr of the 2nd century. According to legend, during a storm, as lightning struck near the mast of a ship, a bright light appeared and remained steady at the tip. The sailors interpreted it as the spirit of Sant'Elmo protecting them. From then on, whenever the lights were seen, it was said that it was him manifesting himself to accompany them. In Spanish and Portuguese, it is called Sant'Elmo, in Italian, San Elmo, in English Esti Elmo's fire. Although it was a physical phenomenon, popular belief transformed it into a symbol of hope. With the advent of aviation, the phenomenon did not disappear. On some flights, especially during extreme electrical conditions, pilots have reported seeing a blue glow on the windshield, wings, or tips of the fuselage. It is the same principle. The metal and pointed structures of the aircraft, when passing through charged clouds, can emit these discharges. Although their cause is now understood, it is still impressive to see a silent blue light moving over a flying machine in the middle of a storm. One of the reasons why Sant'Elmo fires retain their aura of mystery is their rarity. They do not occur in all storms or on all ships or planes. A precise combination of humidity, electric field, altitude, object geometry, and atmospheric conditions is needed for them to manifest. Therefore, despite scientific advances, it is a phenomenon that many have never witnessed, and when it does occur, its beauty and uniqueness have a profound impact. There are accounts from explorers, sailors, and even military personnel who describe the phenomenon with fascination. Charles Darwin reported Sant'Elmo fires on the ship during his voyage on the HMS Beagle. Christopher Columbus also documented strange lights on the mast during his voyage to the New World. These accounts, many centuries before electricity was understood, fueled the mythology surrounding the phenomenon. Some even believed they were souls in torment, seeking redemption on the high seas. In literature and art, Sant'Elmo fires have appeared as a metaphor for hope amid chaos, as a guide in darkness, or as a symbol of the inexplicable. In Mavidic, Melvin mentions them as mysterious omens that sailors fear and respect. In modern popular culture, their name has been used in movies, songs, and novels, evoking the mixture of science, legend, and poetry that surrounds them. Despite modern knowledge, there are elements of the phenomenon that are still not fully understood. For example, why does an intense, long-lasting light sometimes form, while at other times it is only a brief spark? Or why do the discharges seem to move or dance on surfaces in some cases? These variations depend on multiple factors such as air density, particle concentration, the type of conductive material, and the intensity of the electric field, but they are not always easy to reproduce in a laboratory, which keeps some part of the phenomenon in the realm of magic. Furthermore, St. Elmo's fires are not dangerous in themselves, but their presence often coincides with extreme weather conditions. They are linked to storms that do pose real risks, such as lightning, turbulence, heavy rain, and loss of visibility. That is why, even today, when they appear on a modern plane or ship, they're not taken lightly. They are a silent warning that the atmosphere is charged with energy that something powerful is brewing in the sky. The story of San Telmo fires is, at its core, the story of how humans try to understand what they cannot control. For centuries, when science could not provide explanations, the mystery was filled with faith, mythology, and oral stories passed down from generation to generation. And although today we understand the phenomenon as an electrical discharge, the sense of wonder remains, because it is still extraordinary that air can light up, that a storm can generate beauty, that a spark over the sea can fill those who see it with hope. It is this combination of science and legend, physics and emotion, that makes San Telmo fires so fascinating. Not only because they're a rare phenomenon, but because they remind us that even when we think we have all the answers, nature still has ways of amazing us, and that sometimes a simple blue light in the dark can be all we need to believe, to keep going, to feel accompanied in the midst of the storm. The assassination of JFK. On November 22, 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, while traveling in a presidential motorcade. He was only 46 years old. In broad daylight and in front of thousands of witnesses, a series of shots struck the open-top car in which he was traveling with his wife Jacqueline, the governor of Texas with Ney, and his wife. The image of Kennedy falling backward, his wife's panic as she tried to protect him, and the chaotic reaction of the public and Secret Service agents was captured not only on camera, but also in the collective memory of the world. This was not just an assassination. It was the beginning of one of the most debated mysteries of the 20th century. The official version contained in the Warren Commission report, published in 1964, states that the shooter was a single man, Lee Harvey Oswald. Supposedly from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, Oswald fired 3 shots with an Italian-made carcass rifle. 1 bullet missed, another wounded the president and the governor with Ney, and the third caused a fatal wound to Kennedy's head. Oswald was arrested that same day, but was killed 2 days later by Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner, while being transferred by the police. He never stood trial. Since then, millions of people have questioned this version. Most do not believe that Oswald acted alone. Some do not even believe that he fired the shots. Inconsistencies in the investigation, conflicting testimonies, the speed with which Oswald was silenced, and the deaths of several key witnesses over the years fueled a storm of doubt. Theories abound. An inside job, the Mafia, the CIA, the FBI, Cuba, the Soviet Union, each with arguments, clues, and declassified documents that, rather than closing the case, make it more enigmatic. One of the most questioned elements is the so-called magic bullet. According to the official report, a single bullet passed through Kennedy's back, exited his throat, struck Coney in the back, broke one of his ribs, exited his chest, pierced his wrist, and ended up lodged in his thigh. All this without deforming. This bullet was recovered almost intact from a hospital stretcher and was presented as key evidence. However, many experts have pointed out the improbability, if not impossibility, of a single bullet traveling such a path and ending up without significant damage. The famous video by Abraham Zapruder, a citizen who recorded the exact moment of the assassination with his 8mm camera, is another point of controversy. The footage clearly shows Kennedy's head moving violently backward after receiving the fatal shot, suggesting that the shot came from the front, not from behind where Oswald was standing. This led many to suspect that there was at least a second shooter, possibly located on the grassy knoll known as Grassino. In addition, there are testimonies from people who claim to have heard shots coming from different directions. Some Secret Service agents even reported smelling gunpowder in the area of the hill, which would not have been possible if the only shooter was in a building several meters away. Hospital doctors also described wounds that appeared to indicate a frontal impact, contradicting the official version. Lee Harvey Oswald, for his part, always denied killing the president. Upon his arrest, he stated, "I'm just a scapegoat." He worked in the Soviet Union, sympathized with communism, and had connections to both pro- and anti-Castro movements. This complexity in his life led some to believe that he was a pawn in a larger game, manipulated by intelligence services or used by groups with opposing interests. His murder by Jack Ruby live on. Television closed any possibility of him speaking out. Ruby also had links to organized crime. His sudden decision to kill Oswald, according to him, to prevent Jacqueline Kennedy from having to attend a trial, did not convince everyone. Was he sent to silence Oswald, or did he act on his own? Ruby died of cancer in prison before he could provide further explanations. Over the decades, multiple commissions, documentaries, books, independent investigations, and declassification of files have been created in an attempt to shed light on what happened. In 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded that there was probably a conspiracy and that at least 2 people shot the president. However, the other possible suspects were never identified. Many possible conspirators have been named. Some believe that the mafia was behind the crime as revenge for the persecution that the president's brother, Robert Kennedy, had undertaken against them. Others point to the CIA, which allegedly saw Kennedy as an obstacle after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion and his refusal to escalate the conflict in Vietnam. There are also those who blame the military-industrial complex, far-right groups, and even figures within the government itself. Far from clarifying the case, each new revelation, such as the documents declassified in recent years, seems to deepen it. Some files continue to be withheld for national security reasons, reinforcing the idea that there is something that still cannot be revealed. The persistence of these secrets fuels general distrust of official versions, not only in this case, but also in other historical events. The assassination of JFK marked a turning point in the public perception of power and truth. It was the beginning of an era of mass skepticism. People no longer blindly trust what the government says. Television broadcast live not only the tragedy, but also the confusion, improvisation, and fear. And that mixture left its mark. Today, more than half a century later, the mystery lives on, not only because it is not known for certain who fired the shots, but because the case has become a symbol of something greater. The feeling that there are truths we will never know. The assassination of JFK is not just an unsolved crime. It is an open wound in history, a shadow that casts doubt on institutions, power, justice, and collective memory. The questions remain. Why was he killed? Who ordered it? What did Oswald know? What did Ruby drop? What do the documents still under seal contain? And why, after so many decades, is there still no definitive answer? The only thing that is certain is that on November 22nd, 1963, more than just a president was assassinated. The illusion of transparency was shattered, and an era began in which the truth became a puzzle with hidden pieces. And although time passes, the mystery remains. In the summer of 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire and now France, an event so strange and disconcerting occurred that, even today, it remains without a definitive explanation. It began with a woman named Fratrafia. She went out into the street and began to dance without music, for no apparent reason, without rest. She danced for hours, then for days. Soon others began to join her. One after another, the townspeople were possessed by an irresistible urge to move, to spin, to jump, to shake as if their lives depended on it. But what began as a strange act turned into tragedy. Many died of exhaustion, heart attacks, or accidents. History would remember it as the dancing plague of 1518. This event was not a simple isolated case of mass hysteria. It was an outbreak that lasted for weeks and affected dozens, possibly hundreds of people. Contemporary chronicles, including municipal documents, medical journals, and letters from the nobility, confirm what seems incredible: that in the sweltering heat of summer, dozens of people danced non-stop until they died. The case was so serious that local authorities intervened, first with prayers and penance, and then, curiously, with music. Musicians were even hired to accompany the dancers in the hope that they would be cured by dancing. But this only made the problem worse. How can something like this be explained? There are many theories, but none are definitive. Some historians believe it was a case of mass hysteria, a psychological phenomenon that occurs in times of extreme stress. Strasbourg in 1518 was not a peaceful place. They had just survived a great famine. The Black Death was still fresh in the collective memory, and religious tensions were constant. In this context of fear, insecurity, and despair, the body can find unusual ways to release stress. According to this theory, Fratrafia was the first victim and the rest followed her, perhaps unconsciously. But can hysteria really drive someone to dance to death? Another theory points to physiological causes, in particular ergotism, an intoxication caused by consuming rye contaminated with ergot, a fungus that contains alkaloids similar to LSD. This substance can cause hallucinations, convulsions, erratic behavior, and extreme heat sensations. If the population of Strasbourg ate bread made with contaminated flour, it is possible that they entered an altered state that triggered the frenzy. But even if that explains part of the reaction, not all the symptoms match. Furthermore, ergotism tends to cause convulsions, not prolonged, coordinated dancing. A more mystical or symbolic approach suggests that the dancing was a form of collective exorcism. In the Middle Ages, many people believed in demonic possession or divine punishment. Some saw the act of dancing as a way to purge sin, to try to communicate with the divine, or even to free themselves from dark forces. In this context, dancing was not a physical act, but a spiritual one, and once started, it became a ritual beyond rational control. That is why religious authorities did not punish the dancers, but sought ways to channel the phenomenon. They took those affected to chapels, dressed them in sacred garments, and even allowed them to dance in controlled places to calm the force that possessed them. The impact was so great that it was documented in several official sources. The medical chronicler Paracelsus spoke seriously about the epidemic, although he was unable to give a clear cause. Some records say that at least 15 people died a day from exhaustion, heart attacks, or strokes. Other, less official texts speak of up to 400 people affected in total, although the figures vary. The important thing is not so much the exact number, but the fact that the community, authorities, and chroniclers took the event as real, not as a fable. And most disturbingly, the dancing plague of 1518 was not the only one. There were similar, though less documented, cases in other regions of Europe between the 14th and 15th centuries. Episodes were reported in Akiskeren, in the Rhine region, and even in Flanders. In some cases, the dancers formed circles, held hands, and danced until they collapsed. In others, they danced alone, in silence, as if possessed. Some screamed, others cried as they danced. Many said they could not stop. What force can drive a person to move until they die? It is the body taking control when the mind collapses. It is a form of escape, of collective delirium, of spiritual manifestation, or simply a reflection of society on the brink of collapse that finds in madness an escape valve. Another dimension of the mystery is the way the event was interpreted over time. In the 19th century, some romantic writers saw it as a metaphor for the soul trapped in a sick body, dancing toward death. In the 20th century, some psychologists studied it as an extreme case of group psychosis. More recently, the phenomenon has been analyzed in parallel with modern events of mass hysteria, such as outbreaks of uncontrollable laughter in African schools, or mass collapses during religious events. There is always a pattern: social tension, uncertainty, psychological pressure, and a trigger. In a way, the dancing plague reflects a deep fear, the fear of losing control of the body, of the will, the idea that you can be possessed by an invisible force that forces you to act, to slowly destroy yourself without being able to stop. It is the horror of powerlessness, of seeing your body wear itself out while your mind is unable to regain control. Today, Strasbourg is a modern, peaceful European city, but in its archives and ancient streets, the memory of that summer of 1518 still echoes, when fear, hunger, religion, and perhaps something else merged into a senseless, musicless, endless dance. A tragic choreography that, centuries later, still has no definitive explanation. The dancing plague is more than just a strange episode in history. It is a mirror that shows us the limits of reason, the effects of collective stress, the fragility of the human body, and the need to find meaning where there is none. And perhaps that is why it continues to fascinate us so much, so long after it happened.